He's Jim Browdy. I am Marjorie Egan. You are listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, as we do every Tuesday and every Friday. And we are streaming at facebook.com/GBH News and youtube.com/GBH News. And Governor Maura Healey is going to be here from 12 to 1 for another edition of Ask the Governor. She's going to be taking our questions at yours. You can get them in at 877-301-8970. We're going to ask the mayor, Michelle Wu, here on Friday. Hello.
Tuesday.
Whoops, here on Tuesday.
And
ask the AG. Boy, we got a lot of asking to do.
We do have a lot of asking. And by the way, if anybody in the audience wants to do the asking, if you walk over to that table in a couple of minutes, Hannah and Shay, two of our co-workers, will be sitting there. I think you write down your question. Is that what you do? You write down your question and hand it to them. And if it passes the whatever test, we might even ask the question.
We got the governor today, we got the mayor on Tuesday, and we've got the AG on Friday.
We do.
I got it.
Very nicely done, Marjorie.
Thank you very much, Jim.
You know, if there's one thing we know about America, it's that we love drama. We love mess. The appeal of reality TV partially fueled Trump's ascension to the White House in 2016. But 7 years later, have we finally had enough scandal? New data, which is really depressing to me, reported by Axios, finds that we're changing the channel from the former president's legal drama. With every subsequent indictment, the public attention has declined, according to data they pulled from TV, social media, and internet search activity. Have we grown weary of Trump's alleged crimes, and are we just moving on? Is that not a danger for the preservation of our fragile democracy? Or, here's my optimistic self, is it just a summer slump that's turning you away from the news? And even if you have indictment fatigue, are you forcing yourself to pay attention, particularly after this incredible post from Trump the last few days? I'll come after you if you come after me. I got it backwards. If you come after me, I'll come after you. Or are you worried? Are you not worried that the escalating rhetoric might lead to violence yet again? 877-301-8970. Do you have a positive explanation for this?
I do.
Oh, good.
I'm with the summer slump crowd.
Is that...
Yeah, I think you just can't. I think after a while you just can't take it. Okay, there's so many indictments, there's so many things going on. I'll wait till September. We can keep them all straight. We got the Fonnie Willis, Georgia one coming in
next couple of weeks. Yeah.
So I mean, how many indictments can you take in a single month? Jim?
By the way, I have to admire your position.
I think that's it.
All he's accused of is attempting to lead a coup.
That's right.
And if we can't wait till September to address the coup issues, who are we as a people?
Well,
it's
the
August.
attempted coup was last January, so what's a few more weeks waiting to talk about the coup? I think that's it. No, I'm serious. I think it's really hard. I mean, you go on vacation. I was on vacation some last week.
I was aware of
that.
Yeah, I know that.
In August.
You were off yesterday too, so was I.
I am not going to spend my entire vacation reading about indictments. It's just too depressing.
Why not?
Because it's too depressing. You want a little, upbeat thing for your vacation. Time with the family, time at the beach. You don't want to be reading. I think
if you want upbeat stuff, instead of dealing with a coup, read about, I don't know, paying off a porn star. I mean, that's something. Or an adult entertainment figure, whatever you're supposed to call her.
I think if you had a choice, would you rather read about the coup or would you rather read about paying off a porn star? I think you might say, I'll go with the porn star and get to the coup later.
You know what's unbelievable? I know this is a pathetically unoriginal thought, but let me say it if I may. If we weren't overwhelmed with the alleged criminal behavior of Donald Trump, some of the non-criminal behavior, like the sexual harassment and all that stuff, those 24 women who credibly accuse him of something inappropriate, if not unlawful. If all of a sudden, 2 weeks ago, a special counsel came out with an indictment saying the former president of the United States essentially attempted to overthrow the government of the United States.
I think that's the problem.
Well,
here.
how pathetic are we?
Because the zone has been flooded here. There's so much stuff going on. You can't keep track of it. We talked last week about the mental health issues here. I mean, how depressing it is to think about the crisis we're in, in the country and with your families, and you can't talk about politics, blah, blah, blah. So I think that there's a toll. At some point, you have to step back from it. And by the way, it is really pouring outside.
And your point is what?
We better watch out for flooding right here in the city of Boston. 877-301-8970.
Marjorie wants August off, essentially, is what she's saying. Not from work, but from having to dwell on the alleged crimes.
Look what the French do.
How are you going to deal
Look
with
at the
Georgia
French.
when Fani Willis comes down with what is maybe the most comprehensive set of indictments against the greatest number of people, and it's going to happen between now and the 18th because they're closing down all the streets around the courthouse in Georgia through next Friday. What are you going to say? Get back to me in September?
Well, I'll tell you what I would do if I were on vacation. I would not spend the whole day in my beach chair reading the indictment.
Is that really true?
No. I think
Wait.
need a break.
If the indictments out of Georgia came down while you were on vacation, you wouldn't read them?
Jim.
She's not making eye contact. She knows she's like in dangerous territory.
Everybody text the entire staff at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday.
Like who
you know
does?
What I mean?
Who does that?
Some people would
Why
say
is he laughing?
that you're
What's
a
his
little
problem?
obsessive. I mean, you text us on Friday alerting us to what's going to happen next Tuesday, and you say to
somebody's
yourself,
got to text you.
Can't you wait till Monday to tell you about what's going to happen on Tuesday?
Okay, one more thing before we get to the calls. When this guy says, if you come for me, I'm coming for you. And after he realizes it may be seen as it was, in my opinion, a threat to the prosecutors, a threat to the judge, a threat to witnesses, witness intimidation. And then he says, no, it was just his people saying, no, we're just talking about some of the political forces that oppose this. Everything I've read about this Judge Chutkan has been good. Ron Sullivan was with us the other day. He used to be her supervisor when she was a criminal defense lawyer at D.C. Public Defender's Office. Can you explain to me why she didn't summon the lawyers for Trump immediately? I know there was a request for a protective order by Jack Smith for the evidence and that sort of thing. Why did she not summon him right immediately to ask questions about whether or not this was not a threat to witnesses, judges, prosecutors, etc.? Because it clearly was.
Did you see the Drudge Report today?
I did.
Did you see the come hither picture of Judge Eileen Cannon?
No, I did not.
Well, she wasn't. She was looking very unjudge-like in the photograph.
What does that have to do exactly with what we're talking about?
I just want to say, if you want a little distraction.
This is really a problem.
From the new. I mean, I think. Listen, you're obsessed with this. I mean,
so are you.
Well, I'm not as obsessed as you, and I think we all need a little break. And I can understand why people that are on vacation, as most people are, for some part of July or some part of August, they need a break.
Sad.
But did you mention the fact that the money being raised is not as significant now either?
By him, I did not mention that.
Yes, I mean, that I think that people that are big fans of the former president, they're just not throwing the money at this as often as they did before, because they too are probably out of money actually at this point. The number of indictments has been so significant.
Oh, I just checked the weather. There's a tsunami headed for the library. Can we hold that till September? Good. We'll talk about it right after Labor Day. 877-301-8970. By the way, if you're not here or not watching on one of these, whatever it is, Facebook or YouTube, Marjorie's not kidding. I mean, you take this stuff as seriously as almost any human being I know. The fact that you want a break is like
Jim,
devastating to me.
This is what I do for a living. So
I'm aware of that.
I can't really take a break, unfortunately.
Oh,
I
she's
wish I could take a break.
backtracking. Here
But
she
I'm
goes.
saying,
She's backtracking.
If you were surprised that the average American who doesn't do this for a living, who doesn't have to read all this stuff day after day after day, if they don't want to take a break from this, I think you're missing the whole mental health angle. I think everybody wants to take a break from this because it's just too much to think about all the time. And by the way, Charles from Cambridge just texted us and said, we do not need every person in the world to pay attention to each indictment, just the 12 who are on that particular jury. So
okay, 877-301-8970. Are you taking a break? Do you have indictment fatigue? I even hate saying the words. How are you dealing with it if you do? Michael and Taunton, you're first on Boston Public Radio. Thank you so much for your call. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I think we're excellent. Thank you.
Good. So I had I have a counter argument on what you were just saying with the indictments. I think the supporters for Trump, obviously at this point, they just find it to be pretty much white noise with all the indictments that they've kind of thrown at him. And since it's an election year, they feel a little jaded, where they feel maybe they should have gone after him 2 years ago. Maybe them seeing that they want to make this a very quick trial and have it done before the elections is also, to them, considered election interference. Also, with the president with such a low approval rating and the apparent or supposed corruption that's going on, I feel like they're using this as a tactic.
Yeah, but Michael, if I may, the flaw in your thesis is this Axios research is not just talking about Trump supporters. They're talking about the population as a whole. Trump haters, Trump supporters, neutrals, if there are any left in the country. So it's not just them, you know?
I understand. I think that I don't think it's that they're kind of burnt out with all the indictments. I think they just don't find that much credibility in them. I mean, with things like when you have sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Well, but Michael, you lost me, and they don't find much credibility in this. I have read this indictment twice, not once, but twice. Yeah. It is one of the most compelling, I use small letter I, indictments of any human being, much less a former president, I've ever read in my life. I have no idea if Smith can prove this stuff. We'll find out in trial. But I'll tell you, not you. One really has to be in a state of denial to suggest that this is not an attempted coup that's being described. Michael, thank you for your call. We appreciate it. 877-301-8970.
You know,
Marjorie, the reason she was silent during Michael's call, I just looked at her computer. She's researching renting a kayak for the last half of August, and so you can't focus, I know, on this.
Jan from South Carolina. Thank you for calling, Jan.
Hey, Jan.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. I just want to say thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
And we need to stay the course, and that means self-care. That means to not completely flood ourselves so we can deal with this. It is a catastrophe. It's very difficult. So certainly to disengage so we can then really be focused on what we need to do is very important.
Exactly.
I'm a retired licensed psychotherapist. And
you are.
There has to be a middle ground. I believe Trump is the cancerous tumor on a party that's a cancer for our country. And this takes a long-term strategic effort to get through this. So self-care and, not to flood ourselves is very important.
So before you go, is what Marjorie described stepping back, which she intends to do for August? Is that what you're talking about?
I am. I mean, she's not I think that's a very good example.
Okay.
She's not disengaged from the process. She's just taking a break. I mean, you can call it a mental health day, whatever you want to call it.
Mental health month.
But exactly, we can't be hyper focused on this.
Oh, yes, we can.
All the time, or we're going to burn out, and we don't want that.
Okay, Jan, thank you for the call.
Exactly. Not everyone is like you, Jim.
What?
You will be sitting. Do you sit in the beach? Actually, I don't know if you even do that.
I sit on my couch.
You sit in your couch.
I open my computer.
Okay. So
and I read about Trump.
You won't be sitting on your beach chair in Wellfleet this August.
I'm actually taking my couch to the Cape. It would be in August, so I feel comfortable reading the latest news.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone will be doing that. Some people will be doing that.
You don't find there's not even if you're right, and Jan, the former therapist, says you're right, self-care, whatever that self-care is what she described. Mm-hmm. You don't find this even if you say to yourself, "I'm going to take a break today, a mental health break from this." You're not drawn to this? I mean, this is as serious as anything we've encountered in our lifetimes.
It is very serious, but like I said, I think that particularly in the summertime, people need a break. And I don't know if you mentioned the routinization, if that's even a word. This is becoming sort of routine.
No, I didn't, but that is part of the problem.
That the missteps are so common and so frequent that it's not as shocking as you say, as it was in the first indictment. I mean, they talk about in this Axios piece about how interest in terms of TV ratings and listenership was huge after the first announcement of the. That was the hush money.
Hush money was first, and then it was Mar-a-Lago, and there was
that was so that makes sense that the first one got the biggest attention and the most money, and they get diminished as it goes along. It makes sense to me, particularly at this time of year.
One of the things, I'm trying to be more sensitive to the listeners' concerns and your concern. If you really do need a break, the only advice I can give you, and again, I'm trying to be open-minded to things, if you have a friend who can give you $267,000 to buy a van or an Airstream like Clarence Thomas's wealthy friend. Did you read that story?
Well, later on we're going to talk about the appeal of van life, just driving around the country. See, the beauty of van life in this particular juncture is how many places have absolutely no internet or Wi-Fi, so you don't know what's going on.
A guy lends a Supreme Court justice $250,000 to buy an Airstream, whatever it is, and refuses to answer any questions except the loan was satisfied. You know what satisfied can mean?
I don't know.
That he forgave it. It may mean there was no interest. It may mean it was below market value. Are you not upset about that either?
I think that, once
summer.
again, I think the transgressions by that particular justice have become so expensive.
Thomas.
They become routine as
Can
well.
you imagine doing that, by the way? Can you even imagine?
No.
877-301-8970. Let's go to Jean somewhere in Massachusetts, obviously hiding out. Hello, Jean. How are you?
Hi there. Very good.
Good.
I'm from Vineyard Haven, Massachusetts.
Oh, great. Great.
And I'm delighted to read about the charges being brought against Trump. I'm
However,
outraged about the information about Justice Thomas.
Yeah.
But I firmly believe that it is important to take breaks from my gratitude to both the press and the judges who are bringing the charges, and I hope more will be brought in Georgia.
Prosecutors, yeah.
I hope they will be heard before the election.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to the African American Movie Festival that's taking place on Martha's Vineyard right now for the week. It's an astonishing event, and there was discussion about, based on a film about beautiful resistance, sponsored by the columnist at the Globe, about the need to take.
Oh, Janae Osterholt, you're talking about. The brilliant
That's right.
writer
And
at the Globe.
Brilliant. And time to take some time away so as not to burn out and to also stay focused on what we are all fighting for.
Beautifully
not
put.
To get lost in the fire hose. Okay.
Jean, that's beautifully said.
Yeah.
Vineyard Haven, which is Ron DeSantis' favorite part of New England, if I remember correctly. Jean, thank you much for the call.
Don in the car. Every time I try to escape the news cycle, I just get pulled back in. Pat from West Roxbury. I'm at the point where I am invoking the wisdom of the Serenity Prayer. There is nothing I can do at this time, so I just have to accept the things I cannot change.
What is the Serenity Prayer? Say again.
You know, God help me to do something about the things I can and not do something about not sweat the things I can't. That's not it. I'm paraphrasing.
Oh, it's
but it's the AA prayer. And people use it to accept the things I cannot change, something like that.
Okay.
I'm sorry I can't say it from
That's
memory.
fine.
Anyway.
Maybe in September you'll get it exactly.
That's right. We're going to talk. We're going to keep talking about this for a few more minutes. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH. We're broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library. We are streaming at facebook.com/GBH News and youtube.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy, Marjorie Egan. We're live at the library, streaming at facebook.com/GBH News, youtube.com/GBH News. Governor Healey is here in 40 minutes. She'll be here for an hour to take our questions and yours. And as we always do with the governor, she's kind enough to take questions from the floor here, too, at the Newsfeed Cafe, if you choose. The mayor will join us next Tuesday. The attorney general will join us next Friday. That's right, next Tuesday and Friday. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about, I guess we're calling it Trump indictment fatigue syndrome. New data shows, this is Axios, public's attention is waning as the former president faces more and more criminal charges for his attempt to overturn an election. The number is 877-301-8970. Marjorie thinks the slump is attributable to the fact that it's summer, people need a break, that shrink that called said we need a mental health break kind of thing. I am deeply concerned if our attention wanes at all when these charges are serious and a threat to our democracy, a threat to democracy like it is. Yeah.
Okay, Peter from Providence, he says, when I need a break from the madness of Trump, I check out the war in Ukraine.
That's great.
That's
a very fine point.
It's a very bad point, but it's a good point,
It's
but
a
it's
good
kind of
point,
a
but
sad
point, yeah.
point. And where's the one that says Jim is going crazy?
I'm not going crazy.
Yeah, he says Jim is going crazy.
I feel a responsibility as a citizen. Marjorie obviously does not. She's got to worry about going to the...
I'll find it.
By the way, you don't even go to the beach. You're so white-skinned. You're always telling me all the... You don't even
go to the beach.
So what do you do?
I sit under an umbrella with a 50%.
So what's the point?
Because I can't get a tan. I don't
No, I mean, what's the point of going then?
You sit there and you look at the ocean.
Oh, you do?
And you hear the waves.
Oh.
And you look at people
that's
making
nice.
their sandcastles on the beach. Don't you ever go to the beach, Jim?
No.
You would beg the
I do.
question.
Actually, I love the beach.
You do? Okay.
I do.
Then are you going to sit there?
Oh, look at my phone. I'm serious. I mean, this is whatever. Let's go to Steve in a car. You're on with Marjorie. You're going to meet Jim Browdy on Boston Public Radio. Hey.
Hey, thank you for taking my call. First time, long time.
We love you for it. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't know how one can take a break from what is maybe the most important trial in our history.
I agree with that.
And as you so eloquently said, our democracy hangs in the balance. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that we're all involved in this to whatever degree we can be, because of the ramifications if things go wrong. And to me, it's terrifying.
Let me just say, I'm so glad you agree with me, and Marjorie will see what she says in response in a second, Steve. I want to be clear. I don't care if you love everything Trump does, you think he's a criminal of epic proportions, or you're undecided, even though I don't know how anybody can be undecided, sadly, in this country right now. Our democracy is hanging by a thread. It's not going to wait till September. What?
He's a despicable human being, and people forget. I mean, I can't remember how many hundreds of psychiatrists and psychologists prior to the 2016 election took a full-page ad out in the Times to talk about how he was...
Well, actually, Steve, I spoke to one of those psychiatrists on Greater Boston. It wasn't just a full-page ad. They wrote a book. There were 27 psychiatrists who wrote a book, the title of which one of our colleagues will get for us in a second, about the psychiatric state of affairs
narcissism
for candidate Trump. And by the way, theoretically, they're precluded by the American Psychological Association from weighing in on the mental health state of a person they haven't individually observed or seen. But my attitude is you have public obligation. Steve, thanks for your call. We appreciate it. Talk soon.
Okay, here's Jeff in Providence. I am with Marjorie. Jim is acting like a crazy person. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but grind exceedingly fine.
What does that mean?
Or slow.
What does that mean?
Well, the wheels of justice turn slowly. I don't know what exceedingly fine
means.
They're
turning right now, aren't they?
Well, they're not turning yet because the court cases haven't begun. We're still in the
they actually have begun.
Well, we're in discovery. We're going back and forth. Okay. Now here's Robin Lowell has got a health issue here.
What's
and he's
he say?
Absolutely right. When I hear Republicans defend this criminal, I have to step away or have a coronary or a stroke. So he's looking at this from a health perspective. And here's Connie from South Natick taking a break by watching the Little League World Series now in preliminary rounds.
How did Canton do yesterday, by the way? Jamie, how did Canton do? You have no idea, of course. In Little League, they're 2 games away from making a Little League World Series. You don't care about that? Apparently not. Okay, fine. He admitted he doesn't care about that. He doesn't care about that. You don't care about the attempt to overthrow the election. That's the state of affairs.
Let's go to Greg in Providence. Thank you for calling, Greg.
By the way, excuse me, Greg, the name of the book was, thank you, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess the president, organized by that woman from Yale whose name I can't remember, who has been essentially relentless for the last couple of years on this issue. Greg in Providence, welcome.
Well, I thought he had early dementia, but I was proven wrong in that regard.
I think
At
you were.
any rate, I'm enjoying your conversation, Jim and Marjorie. And Jim, I'm like you. I can't get enough because our democracy is hanging in the balance. I completely agree.
That's right.
However, your commentary last week is what I'm also referring to
What'd
about.
I say?
What did the Greeks and Romans do? They attempted to exile their lackluster leaders, for lack of a better word, to the island of Capri or elsewhere. So I got the perfect place for Trump.
Where?
We know he doesn't like being marginalized, and we also know he hates diseases. So he should be banished to Plum Island.
Plum Island, because it's going underwater? Is that why?
No, because that's where the USDA disease laboratory is, and that's featured in the Hannibal Lecter movie.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Greg, thanks, Cole. Did you read Ann Coulter?
belongs.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it. Did you read Ann Coulter's tweet this weekend? You know, she's a former
turned on
Trump
him.
loyalist.
Yeah.
And I'm going to paraphrase, I don't have it in front of me. She said, in the ideal world, Trump would be tried and convicted in Texas. He would then be assigned to some sort of gang on the southern border of Texas, and his task would be required to build the wall, which I thought was pretty.
So she's turned on him.
Totally turned on him. Yeah. By the way, I don't know if it's on the merits or she thinks he can't win, and she's concerned that the Republican be reelected, but she's clearly turned on him. Bandy X. Lee is the professor at Yale who's the organizer of that effort of the 27
Yeah, we have
psychiatrists.
someone who just texted and wanted to give credit for the Serenity Prayers authorship, not
Who?
AA written. It
Who
was
is it?
Reinhold Niebuhr.
Oh.
A theologian, a great theologian, actually, and a lot of people, he's written a lot of great books. Can someone please tell Jim to pace the rage? It's a marathon, buddy, not a sprint. So that's an interesting one,
I'm ready
too.
for a marathon.
And here's Art in West Bridgewater, who says, the fatigue is progressives' own fault. You've been beating this drum since Trump took office, particularly around election time. People hear the same old, and turn it out.
Tuned it up.
Or
Whatever
tuned
it
it
is.
out.
Well,
Whatever.
I got the point.
They've
there.
stopped listening. is the
Okay,
point.
fine.
Stephen Wilmington, thank you for calling.
By the way, wait a second. I just had some really good news. We have an alpaca coming to Studio 3 on Thursday. A live alpaca in the studio. Live alpaca to help Jim calm the F down is what Jamie. Can I ask a question?
What are you supposed to do?
What happens
stroke
when the alpaca, what do you say, craps in the studio? Do you know we had a couple of parrots with John Gruber and his
did.
wife a couple of years ago, and they crapped literally like projectile crapping all over. What do you?
We're near a food establishment.
Well, it is what
here.
it is. Did they crap all over the studio?
They're trained not to do that, Jamie
Yeah,
says.
of course
They're
they
trained
are.
not to do that.
Until
so,
they do it.
Yeah, so we'll be on
Yeah,
guard.
he's good.
What are you supposed to do? Pet the alpaca? That's
What do you
supposed
do with
to
the
make you
alpaca?
feel better?
What do you
Why
do
do we
with
have
it?
an alpaca?
Fine.
It's supposed to be soothing, like the Serenity dogs.
I
they
went
send
to
the
this. Let me
hospital.
tell you, I shouldn't say this. I'll save it for Thursday. Maybe I won't. I went to this fabulous restaurant. I never eat lunch anywhere. I had La Royale. The people own Celeste and all that stuff, Esmeralda, and they just started doing lunches in West Cambridge on Huron Avenue, kind of thing. I had an alpaca burger for lunch. I think we should. I did. First time ever. I guess
And
we
now
shouldn't
you're having
mention
an
it.
alpaca
Well,
in the
I didn't
studio
know
on
the alpaca
Thursday?
was coming on Thursday, and so
Okay.
don't hold it against me.
Stephen Wilmington, thank you for calling.
Steve, hi.
Oh, did you say Wilmington?
Wherever you are is what we said. Hi, Steve. Welcome to the
Okay.
show. Where are you?
I'm in Winchendon.
Close enough.
That's okay.
Close enough.
Yeah. So here's my thought. Put the pressure on. Keep it coming. As many indictments as we can possibly get, I think, is good, because eventually, the camel's back is going to break. I really believe that. I mean, they can deny, as many of these indictments as they want, but if they keep coming and keep putting pressure on him and keep bringing him into the light to show what a cockroach he is, I don't think he's going to survive. So
obviously not a Trump fan. Thank you, Steve, from Winchendon. Again, I want to reiterate my position about not getting Trump indictment fatigue applies equally to people who love him and people who can't stand him, because it's all about the continued existence of our democracy. I don't even believe that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. I mean, I know you a little bit. I know you like to take nice vacations, but I think this is going to be irresistible for you. I hope it's going to be irresistible for you.
Well, we'll see. I think the next indictment is supposed to come down before I'm on vacation. So unless there's another indictment waiting in the wings I don't know about, that should be the last one until Labor Day.
Did you see the
know what
picture of
I'm
the
saying?
alpaca?
The alpaca is really quite adorable.
Do you believe I ate that yesterday?
That's terrible. You ate burger made out
I
of
feel
that.
horrible about
What
that,
a cute
actually.
little face the
I
alpaca
didn't even know what an
has.
alpaca was till just then.
They're very, very
It's really
adorable,
horrible.
Jim.
Jack, and what is this in Massachusetts thing? What are you, like in a protection program? Where are you, Jack?
Acton, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay, that's honest. Go ahead. Welcome from Acton. How are you, Jack? What's your point?
Well, we started the Revolutionary War, and you kind of should know where we are.
Okay, well, no one told me you were in
point,
Acton.
Jack.
I'm thrilled to know. Hello.
We fired the first shot. And so anyway, I just wanted to bring up the point.
What about Concord and Lexington? Is it Acton?
Well, Concord had the right of first refusal to attack the bridge. They deferred. So the Acton militia stepped up, and that's why the first casualty was the leader of the Acton militia.
I didn't know this either.
Neither did I.
Well, thank you for the history
I thought
lesson.
Acton was just kind of there, floating about in space. I didn't know. There you go.
Whatever.
We don't sell merch.
Okay.
Okay, so what's your point here, Jack? Thank you for calling.
I was just going to point out that the audience obviously is a diverse group of people, some of whom have the endurance and tenacity and ferocity and commitment to the rule of law that Jim does, but they don't have the, all of them don't have the endurance. And therefore, there are people who need to step away. I know quite a few of my friends don't like to listen to my talking about the issues with Trump. But it's important to remember that one of the ways that fascists take over in a democratic country is by dividing the populace and agitating them to the point where their critical reasoning is affected.
Right.
So they become so emotional they can't think logically. And that is a key tool in the psychology. That's the reason that Trump, when he was in office, was doing crazy things like allowing the import of heads of killed animals, hunted animals from Africa, and allowing the hunting of bears even when they're hibernating, including their cubs. It was to antagonize and therefore enrage the population so they become, let's just say, charged, emotionally charged, and unable to organize and cooperate and prioritize and focus. It's that diffusion of their focus that the fascist has to concentrate on because they rarely start with a majority.
So let me be clear. The point of all this is you're saying stepping back, as Marjorie and a lot of our listeners say they intend to do at least for a while, you think is a dangerous behavior.
No, I think it is a natural protective mechanism that allows us to retain focus and keep our eye on the ball.
Okay.
I do think the media does a few disservices to the public. The first is that they tend to hyper-focus on very few issues. The second is they tend to follow the bouncing ball that the Republicans are constantly throwing out. What they really need to do, in my opinion, would be to pick a few key topics and hammer on those and then follow up on them. So, for example, if one of the Trump accomplices gets arrested and charged with something, follow up on what happened to him. And the second thing to do is to keep a pantheon of these guys that you can refer to say, see how bad it is to crime against America? Look at what happened to these guys. We have very little of the deterrence function of punishment from justice being emphasized. And
well, let me just say, if I can credit one person who's done exactly with those convicted for their January 6th behavior relentlessly, it's Juliette Kayyem, former Homeland Security person for Obama, who's a weekly guest on our show. She has been talking about how important those stiff sentences are. And by the way, Jack, thanks for the call, a judge who has sentenced every January 6th defendant who has been convicted before her to some jail time, even if the prosecutors didn't request any, would be Tanya Chutkan, who was the judge randomly assigned to the case of Donald Trump in the most recent indictments. In any case...
Here's Michael in North Carolina. Says, please tell Jim to relax a little. I'm concerned he'll have an aneurysm. I'm definitely paying close attention, but you can't keep the volume on 11 for the next 8 months. And that is a very good prescription for you, I think, Jim.
I plan to keep it on 11 for the next 8 months, or beyond if necessary.
Okay.
We got to go.
We got to go. Coming up, we're going to talk with the governor's going to be here right after the noon news. She's going to be here for an hour. If you want to reach her by text or phone, the number's 877-301-8970. She's going to take our questions and yours. But right now, we're going to talk to civil liberties attorney Harvey Silverglate is next. He's representing one of the unindicted co-conspirators in the Trump indictment about January 6th. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Marjorie Egan and Jim Browder. We're live at the library, streaming at facebook.com/GBH News, youtube.com/GBH News. Governor Healey will be here in under a half hour. She'll spend an hour with us and you for Ask the Governor. Next Tuesday, the mayor is here for Ask the Mayor, and next Friday, the AG, Andrea Campbell, is here for Ask the Attorney General. Cambridge-based Harvey Silverglate is a legendary First Amendment and civil liberties attorney. His latest client has grabbed the headlines. He is co-counsel to an alleged unindicted co-conspirator number 2 in Trump's most recent indictment. That'd be Trump attorney John Eastman. You'll recall Eastman, according to the indictment, he gave then-President counsel using arguments premised on false claims of election fraud to help lead an effort to pressure then Vice President Pence to prevent Joe Biden's election certification. Harvey Silverglate joins us now. Harvey, good to speak to you.
I think it's good to be on. We'll see that in a few minutes. Huh?
Okay.
We will see it. Pleasure to have you, though.
You know, I think a lot of us can remember John Eastman, though, probably got the Best Dressed award for the day in the Ellipse. He had that wide-brimmed hat on and a coat and scarf. He was all dressed up when he was speaking up there before the assault on the Capitol. But Harvey Silverglate, let's begin. You have submitted this request to the Department of Justice saying that John Eastman has done nothing wrong. Where is that stand at this particular point?
Okay, you're jumping the gun a little bit. Later this week, we will be filing an extensive memorandum of law. It's still being finished up. It'll be about 60 to 65 pages. It will recount the facts and it will discuss the law. And our position will be that everything that Eastman did is protected either by the First Amendment or by his role as a lawyer vindicating the Sixth Amendment right to counsel rights of Donald Trump. So, and we will then ask for a meeting with the Department of Justice. Hopefully they will give us that meeting. I think that we can talk them out of indicting him. I want to make it clear, we're not arguing on behalf of Trump or Giuliani or Sidney Powell or anybody else, just Eastman.
Yeah, Harvey, I want to ask you about some of the specific, we'll get to Trump in a minute, some of the specific allegations in the indictment directed at co-conspirator number 2, John Eastman, who they don't name Eastman, obviously, but we know it to be Eastman. He's your client. Here, let me run down 3 or 4 of them quickly and just see if you agree that these are true and accurate. Eastman, co-conspirator 2, circulated a 2-page memorandum on December 23rd outlining a plan for the vice president to unlawfully declare the defendant the certified winner of the presidential election. Do you acknowledge that he did that?
Yes, but can I amplify?
Of course you can.
He had a theory for why that was so. I would say that as a matter of legal analysis, it was quite far out. It was on the fringe. Mind you, this was an unprecedented situation, and there is no precedent for it. And so he was coming up with creative, cutting edge, some would say bizarre, but within the realm of good faith arguments for why Trump won the election. He was acting in his role as a lawyer, not a co-conspirator.
Well, but Harvey, I think we'd all agree that the only function that the vice president has constitutionally is ministerial, to count the electors. And your client was suggesting that Pence do otherwise. So it's not just far-fetched. It's violent of the Constitution, isn't it?
Let me respond to that. Is there any threat made? This was a suggestion that he expand his role as vice president. And as you know, Jim, constitutional interpretation changes from era to era. And this was just a very creative, cutting-edge idea. Did you hear any threats? Was it a bribe situation? Absolutely not.
Okay, so let me continue down the list of allegations.
Yep.
That he called the Secretary of State, a Republican, big Trump support, not Secretary of State, the Speaker of the House in Arizona, asking him to decertify legitimate electors. And he says in that discussion, he didn't know enough about the facts on the ground, just decertify the electors and let the courts settle it. Is that accurate?
Yes, and tell me what's wrong with letting the court settle it.
Well, because they'd already been certified, and by the legislature, which is the body that in Arizona is granted power to do the certification of legitimate electors. That's
But we all know that in this country there's something called judicial review. The courts have the final word.
And here's another one.
Hold on, let me just stop
yeah.
there for 1 second, though. I mean, I am not a lawyer. You guys are both lawyers. But people voted a certain way in Arizona. They voted for a certain way in Georgia. And according to the indictment, Eastman wanted both leaders in Arizona and Georgia to decertify those wins and put in people whose votes, electors who are saying the opposite. I mean, that's, to a non-lawyer, that does not sound like anything legal or correct.
The issue is not whether
undermining people's votes.
The issue is not whether it's incorrect or correct. The issue is whether it's criminal. And there were no threats, there were no bribes, it didn't fly, and that should have been the end of it. This is not a crime. You know, I wrote a book called 3 Felonies a Day, How the Feds Target the Innocent.
I read it.
This is a classic. The reason I was brought in by Burnham as co-counsel was because he read the book and he thought that Eastman was in a 3 felony situation.
Burnham's your co-counsel. Well, Harvey, how about, wait a second, but how about he admits, according to Smith, the special counsel, that after the certification on January 6th, at 11:44 p.m., that your client reached out to the Vice President's counsel and urged him to consider one more, quote, relatively minor violation of the Electoral Count Act. According to Smith, those are the words of your client: violate the law and adjourn for 10 days so individual legislatures can investigate. Do you acknowledge that your client admitted that what he was proposing was a violation of the Electoral Count Act?
It's a little bit different than that, but let's, for the sake of argument, I will acknowledge it. And I again ask you what was criminal about that.
That he's asking
us. He's asking, is there any, Jim, you're a lawyer.
I am a lawyer, not much of one, but I'm a lawyer.
He was not ordering, he was not threatening, he was asking. He got turned down, and that was the end of it.
So let me just be clear here, Harvey Silverglate. Your position is, unless Jack Smith can prove, and you seem to be admitting that every allegation that Smith has, at least those that I read to you, about your client are accurate, but you're saying, unless Jack Smith can prove that these requests to either violate the law, endorse fake electors and the like, unless they were accompanied by a threat that they are not violative of law or a bribe?
That's correct.
So,
and tell me what's wrong. Tell me how I'm wrong with that.
Well, you're here to tell us what's right about it.
What I don't understand is, are you saying if 1,000 people vote for person X, and Trump or anybody else decides, or John Eastman decides to change that to person Z, maybe that's not a crime, but there's something wrong with that. Are you saying it's a civil offense, or as opposed to a criminal offense, or is just nothing wrong at all without, as Jim just said, a threat or a bribe?
I'm saying this was an unprecedented situation.
What was the unprecedented situation?
Fake electors.
They made things up to make it unprecedented.
That we had an election, which some people contested, and Eastman, acting in his role as a lawyer, was trying to come up with theories that might allow Trump to prevail. The question isn't whether he was right. It's a question whether he was criminal. And these are not criminal activities.
Well, is it a civil problem to undermine the vote of millions of people? That's not some kind of infraction?
You are correct. It is not an infraction.
It's not.
When you don't take any steps to threaten or to bribe, you simply suggest cutting-edge, creative ways of trying to get your client to win.
But the people who were standing up for the correct votes were threatened. People had to move out of their homes. People had attacks online.
In Georgia, in particular,
the gentleman that spoke in Congress, the Arizona guy, people were screaming at his dying wife, or was it his dying child inside his home?
But I'm not sure.
I mean, all sorts of horrible things happened.
I hope you're not saying that Eastman organized these threats, because he didn't.
I'm not saying he organized them, but I'm saying
you can't be responsible if somebody else.
So wait. Let's cut to the chase. I don't buy it all. I mean, with all due respect, forget this. Whether there's a civil violation, Jack Smith believes each of these are criminal violations. I just want to be clear on the record again. Eastman's position, through one of his co-counsel, you, Harvey Silverglate, is that even if he in memos said what I'm asking you to do violates the Electoral Court Act, And if what I'm asking you to do, Mr. Vice President, through his counsel, violates what I think every lawyer who is credible I've ever heard says is the function under the Constitution of the Vice President, namely purely the ministerial counting of ballots, unless they're accompanied with an overt threat or bribe, he has violated no criminal law. I just want to be clear where you are.
He has thrown out a theory, and that's all he has done.
But it's a theory based upon Harvey, based upon his representations that I know. Like in Georgia, for example, in Georgia, he acknowledges that what he signed, Donald Trump, the defendant, as he's called, and he both acknowledge is inaccurate. That they learned subsequently that some of the representations in their, quote, verification were factually inaccurate.
Tell me what is criminal about this. This is not a civil proceeding.
We understand that. We understand that.
Let me move on to something else. We're talking, by the way, with Harvey Silverglate, well-known attorney from Cambridge, who is now representing the so-called conspirator number 2, John Eastman, in the indictment involving the January 6 activities. You have said, and correct me if I'm wrong, Harvey, that what is really going on here is candidate suppression, and that the Department of Justice should wait till after the election to address these matters. Explain that.
That's my strongest argument. There's this long statute of limitations. There is a Republican National Convention coming up. I believe, and a lot of the stuff I've read, people saying, oh, good, we want to keep Trump from being nominated. That is not the job of the Department of Justice. The people decide who the candidates are and then who wins. This is candidate suppression, in my opinion. That is the worst part of all of this.
So,
Harvey, who is
if Trump were to become the next president of the United States, he could throw out this whole case.
He needs to have the voters elect him next president of the United States.
Well, they could.
Of course they could. Guess what? The voters are sovereign in this country.
Harvey, you said to Marjorie a minute ago that some people are saying the goal is to keep Trump from being nominated. You're not alleging that anybody in the Department of Justice has said that, right? I mean, citizens.
I am suggesting that by going after Trump and indicting him before the Republican nominating convention, they're putting their thumb on the scale, and it's up to the party to decide if they're going to nominate him. And then if he gets nominated, it's up to the electorate to decide if he becomes president.
Well, you went even further. In an interview, I think, with NBC 10, you said that this was, quote, an attempt to fix the election for Biden by the Department of Justice.
Correct. Exactly correct. It is unseemly that the party of Biden, the Department of Justice and the Biden, is going after Biden's presumptive. Don't you think that this is a problem for democracy?
I think the problem for democracy is that a former president is credibly charged with attempting a coup, and that one of his lawyers, your client, John Eastman, did everything in his power, in my opinion, well beyond what a lawyer can reasonably do, possibly criminally, and I agree with Jack Smith, to urge the vice president and others around the country to overturn the will of the voters. That's what I think is criminal.
Do you know anybody who's been put in prison for urging?
I don't know. I'm not a student of this stuff, but I assume Jack Smith is no dope. And I have to say, with all due respect, Harvey, the notion that you think Smith and Merrick Garland, even if you disagree with their charging decisions, are attempting to fix the election for the incumbent.
No, I didn't say that.
Yes, you did. Attempt to fix the election for Biden.
They are trying to put the thumb on the scale.
With all due respect, your words were verbatim. I wrote them down. An attempt to fix the election for Biden by the Department of Justice. You said it.
They're putting the thumb on the scale to try to get Biden to be reelected as president, and they're trying to get Biden's most formidable candidate out of the race. That is what is going on. Certainly, you can't think that that's a good thing for American democracy.
Yeah. Harvey Silverglate, you also mentioned that you think 80% of everything you've read in the press is wrong. What is wrong?
What is wrong is that nobody is looking at this as to realize the motives behind this. And mind you, I do not like Trump. I would never vote for Trump. I consider him virtually a sociopath in a lot of ways. I think he has no moral center. But that is not the issue. The issue is the American voter has certain rights, and a democracy requires that the party in power not do everything in its power to try to keep.
But you implied that 80% of the facts were wrong. So those.
I believe, yes, with respect to
what?
Eastman, the facts are wrong.
Like what?
He acted as a lawyer and not as a co-conspirator.
Okay.
He was trying to come up with stratagems for having his client, Donald Trump, win the electoral count.
By the way, that's not a factual misrepresentation by the media. That's a relating of what the indictment by the special counsel says about your client. Harvey, we're going to have to continue this after you do the memo with submitted to the Department of Justice.
We have to ask Harvey one last very quick question.
Quickly.
You're over there in Cambridge, the People's Republic. We always joke about it, Harvey, is the People's Republic of Cambridge. So I'm wondering how your representation is going down in the coffee shops in the neighborhood. What do you think?
Well, I could tell you that I've gotten 2 threats that come right to the edge of being death threats. I've gotten a lot of people who think I should be disbarred. And I've gotten calls from people who wouldn't leave their name. It has been quite an experience in American democracy, and quite an experience in my legal career. Only once before did I have threats, and that's when I represented Harold Brown in connection with the Bulger.
We remember it well. Hey, Harvey, by the way, all of that is totally inappropriate. You can disagree with Harvey's representation and his arguments. Those kinds of behaviors are beyond the pale, and we criticize them when they're in favor of Trump, and we will criticize them when they're not. Hey, Harvey Silverglate, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks
we'll
for
talk to you
coming
again
on,
soon.
Harvey.
See you, Harvey. Thank you.
Appreciate
Bye-bye.
it. We've been speaking with criminal defense attorney Harvey Silverglate, who's representing John Eastman, so-called conspirator number 2 in the indictment just issued by Jack Smith involving the January 6th activities and the attempts to overturn the election, alleged attempts, I'll put it that way. Up next, Governor Maura Healey joins us for the entire 12 o'clock hour. If you want to reach her, you can call her or text her at 877-301-8970. We'll get to as many calls as you can. We also have a homie mic. You can go to our colleague here, Hannah, if you're in the library, and try to talk to the governor that way. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News. He is Jim Browdy. I am Marjorie Egan. This is hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, as we do every Tuesday and every Friday. And we are streaming at facebook.com/GBH News and youtube.com/GBH News. And Governor Maura Healey is just getting out of her car, and she should be here momentarily, Jim.
So the governor will be with us in about a minute, and she will answer your questions, respond to your comments, whatever. At 877, lines are full already. But if you come to the library, there's our colleague Hannah and Shay. You want to raise your hands, you two? Shay there, Hannah there. If you have a question for the governor, fill it out, and they will pass it along, and we'll do our best to get to the governor. Next Tuesday, the mayor, who apparently is on vacation, we just heard on the news, is here with us for Ask the Mayor. And next Friday, Andrea Campbell, the Attorney General, will be here. I think I can I now say? Yes, I can. I can now say we're joined by, is that the governor in the hood?
She's
oh, it
in her
is.
Slicker. She's
I
in her
didn't see
slicker.
it. I didn't recognize
raining
you
out.
from behind. We're now joined by Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey for August Ask the Governor, taking our questions and yours till after 1. You can reach her. Again, lines are full, but they'll open up in a minute. You can text, too, at the same number, 877-301-8970. And welcome, as apparently the applause is already doing, Governor Healey. Good to see you, Governor.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Governor, for coming in. You encountered some rain, I take it, on the way with the slicker on?
There's really severe thunderstorms around, so be careful out there. Those of you on the road right now, be careful.
Well, speaking of emergencies, that's a weather emergency we hope we don't face here in the Commonwealth today. But you declared a state of emergency regarding our shelter services just today. What's going on?
Yeah, today I declared an emergency, and it's important for people to understand what's happening, what's been happening in our state. We are dealing with a humanitarian crisis. We're seeing it here in Massachusetts. We're seeing it across the country. There are so many migrants arriving into our states on a daily basis. And for a state like ours, where there have been tremendous supports and resources as a general matter for housing, our shelter system, our housing system is really incredibly strained. And so it's reached a point where I needed to declare an emergency here in Massachusetts to do a few things. One, to ask for federal intervention and for the federal government to take some necessary steps. One, that is funding, and two, it's the expediting of work authorizations. These migrants who have come, they are so anxious to work. They are ready to work. Instead, they are sitting for not just weeks and months, upwards of a year or more in our hotels, motels, shelters, and other housing emergency places waiting to work. That authorization comes from the federal government. And the federal government right now has the ability to authorize work. It's happened before when we saw folks come from the Ukraine and from Afghanistan. They were given the right to work incident to what was called parole. The same status needs to be given now. I cannot tell you, having talked with and met many of these migrants, they are here today with certifications with licenses from other countries, with incredible language capabilities. Most of the Haitian immigrants who are arriving here, in fact, have come through Central and South America. They have learned Spanish along the way. I met folks the other day. They're ready to go to work in construction as welders, driving trucks, teaching French, you name it. And we know that employers across industries here in Massachusetts are anxious for more workers and workforce. And so it's a call to action. I want to share as a public announcement too the ways that people can get involved, because standing with us today not only was it government, it was members of the faith community, it was members of philanthropy. I'm really pleased that in a short order, the United Way of Massachusetts Bay and the Boston Foundation have stood up a fund to help migrants here meet their needs. If you go to unitedwaymassbay.org/migrant relief, there's a way to contribute. Already we have contributions in from Eastern Bank and Blue Cross Blue Shield. There's also, importantly, there's ways that everybody in Massachusetts can contribute right now. mass.gov/shelter crisis. You'll see a landing page that shows all the different ways that you, as a resident, as a community, as a temple, as a congregation, can get involved and help. The single greatest need right now is for housing. So anyone out there with housing, anyone with property that could be used to house people. We've been talking to college presidents. I was up at Salem State University where our fantastic Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll, prior to becoming Lieutenant Governor, had opened up a shelter for migrants. Anybody who's got space, we want to be utilizing that. The administration is working hard. We have family welcoming centers up and operating in Alston, Brighton, working with the Brazilian Workers Center. We also have one in Quincy, and of course I opened up Joint Base Cape Cod. But I want to be clear, I declared this an emergency today because we have really reached a crisis point when it comes to housing families, and we need help from the federal government.
Why is this happening now?
Because it's reached a point where the capacity just isn't sustainable, and I want to put
Are people coming from elsewhere? Is this another one of people being shipped up from far away to Massachusetts, or is this something different than normal?
Well, we've seen, just if you take a snapshot of last year at this time, we've seen an 80% increase. What does that look like every day? Today in Massachusetts, we will see between 10 and 20 families, 10 and 30 families arriving here in Massachusetts. Oftentimes, they will have flown here, landed at Logan Airport. Many of them are having plane tickets bought for them by organizations and entities in Texas, churches and otherwise, but they are arriving here, and they are arriving in numbers that are only increasing. So we don't see that abating, Marjorie.
Okay.
We see that both the administration, communities, and our existing shelter infrastructure have really been maxing out. We just simply are running out of capacity. So that's why I'm declaring this an emergency. And really, to drive home the point to the federal government, we need action now. Sure, we need funding. But as importantly, if not more importantly right now, we need expedited work authorizations, because we're not going to be able to exit people from current housing and shelter scenarios unless they have that ability to work.
Congress has got to do that, right? Not
No,
the administration?
The administration can do that as well.
So why is Joe Biden not doing that?
I thank members of our congressional delegation who have been long time advocates for immigration reform, and Congress should have acted. I mean, part of the reason we are in this situation today, it is a geopolitical issue. It is also, not helped by the fact that Congress hasn't passed the kind of immigration reform that we need. And so we are in communication with the White House. I continue to be in communication with the Biden administration. And today we're just outlining and making clear what the state of affairs here is in Massachusetts, that we have reached a crisis point. And by taking these steps, the federal government can help us relieve the strain and the pressure. And by the way, that will be good for Massachusetts. As I say, we have a workforce shortage here right now. And we have groups of people who are most, not only resilient, you think about the journey, they did something that any one of us would do. You leave an incredibly dangerous situation. You're bringing your kids. Sometimes you're fleeing when you're pregnant. We've had babies born here. Why? Because they are only looking for safety and an opportunity. And so we have a situation where we can actually make this work in a way that's going to be really good for Massachusetts, for our economy and what we need to do right now. And we have always been a beacon of hope and of opportunity to people around this country. I know we can meet this moment, but today was really a collective call to action.
Very quickly, Governor, I was mistaken, obviously, based on what you said. Why doesn't Joe Biden just do this like now, like by 1 o'clock, if he has the power to do it?
Well, these are hard and complicated things, these programs and the way that authorizations work. But part of what we're trying to do is to make the point that this can happen and it needs to happen, and we're going to continue to stay in touch with them.
You mentioned construction and welders and truck drivers.
Think about our hospitals right now.
But the caring professions,
healthcare, human services
are desperate.
Are desperate, and so that's why, Marjorie, we have this opportunity in this state. If we can just convene people of goodwill to come around and work together on this. It is also the case we need help from the federal administration. But right now, today, if you go to mass.gov/shelter crisis, there's ways to help. We heard this morning from Reverend Katie Cole. She is at a congregation in Natick. And in June, they got together and they decided that they were going to begin to take in families. And it's just an example of what's happening. We heard from Dr. Gabot, who runs IFSI, which is our major Haitian service provider here in Greater Boston. And every day they are training people, they are helping them apply for asylum or for work authorizations that, yes, need to be expedited. Also, important for people to know, every day migrants are taking English classes. But we also need help with ESL teachers. We need help from those who can provide childcare, who can drive migrants to appointments, who can, and not just migrants, but families here in Massachusetts, because it's also the case, and it's something that our administration is working on. I appointed the first ever Secretary of Housing. Our budget includes substantial investments that both I proposed and the House and Senate have proposed for housing. There are a lot of ways for people across the state who are compassionate and people of goodwill to step forward and meet this moment.
Let's take some phone calls. Governor Maura Healey is kind enough to join us till the top or a little bit into the next hour. 877-301-8970. Jasper, you're in Marlboro. You're on with the governor. Welcome.
Thank you. Governor, I wanted to ask a question regarding reproductive care and parental health. I'm noticing that a lot is happening in Massachusetts and across the country. I have seen research about America's crisis in maternity care, and unfortunately, Massachusetts as well can do better in regards to health equity. For example, the closures of maternities and birthing centers will make care more inaccessible to underserved communities. Also, as a part of my college studies, I have read many journals on the struggles of seahorse parents, who are also known as birthing parents. Many experience discrimination in the healthcare system. Is there any plans to pass legislation to improve parental health rates, including legislation to provide more equitable care to trans and gender expansive parents-to-be?
Thanks for your question, Jasper, and for calling in. I'll say a couple of things. We have seen notices by various hospitals across the state, closure of maternity wards, and I know that is deeply concerning for communities. Our Secretary of Health and Human Services and the team will work through those issues, making sure that people have access to health care generally, and certainly maternal care around the state is something that has always been a priority for me. I also am mindful of some of the disparities that we're seeing when it comes to maternal health and the outcomes. And in fact, later today, I have a meeting with a group of advocates to discuss our administration's ongoing work to address real health disparities that persist, particularly across racial and ethnic lines when it comes to maternal health and other realms. And then in terms of equity, Jasper, and I appreciate your questions raised about parents, and I want to say that this is an administration that always centers equity at everything that we do, and look forward to more conversations with advocates about how best we can serve the most people in the most equitable way.
Thank you, Jasper, for your phone call. The number is 877-301-8970.
Governor Healey, we just talked with Harvey Silverglate. We talked with listeners earlier on about the Trump indictments by Jack Smith involving interference with the election, trying to put fake electors in, trying to pressure state legislators to overturn people's votes. Do you think the former president has committed federal crimes?
Yeah, he's been indicted. I mean, so the president, I believe, has committed crimes that are both federal, state. He's already the subject of multiple indictments, and I trust the work of the prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions. That's another point. This isn't just one prosecutor's office. These are multiple indictments from different prosecutor's office, state, federal, and I hope that ultimately justice prevails, and the kind of accountability that frankly our democracy deserves is something that we see soon.
Is accountability include jail time for the former president if he's convicted of crimes? There are a lot of people who think Trump is guilty, who believe it would be bad for this country if a former president was incarcerated. Are you among them? I
don't know. I'm still a lawyer, and you go wherever the facts and the law take you, and you go whatever is the attendant sentencing regime. You don't get any special out just because you happen to be a former president.
And you wouldn't be unhappy as a leader in this country if a former president, I don't mean unhappy, it's a poor choice of words, you wouldn't be troubled if a former president of the United States was incarcerated, if that was the decision of the judge.
Well, I live by this constitutional precept of equal treatment under the law. What I do think is troubling and what is a sad commentary for the country is that we're even in this situation where we have a former president subject to multiple indictments, continuing criminal prosecution and investigation. It is why people need to register to vote, run for election. We need good people running for office. And that is not a partisan comment. It is simply a comment about democracy and the need to make sure that as we move into 2024, that we are doing everything that we can to support governors, secretaries of state, attorneys general, and county election officials as we head into the national election, because the forces, the nefarious, and that's a polite word for them, forces that were at play and trying to wreak havoc with our system in 2020 have not gone away. We need to be strong as Americans. We need to stand up for democracy.
Julian Mansfield, you're next with the Governor of the Commonwealth, Maura Healey. Welcome.
Hi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was calling to talk about the School Nurse Liaison Project. As we know, there's a growing crisis of mental health among kids and in schools. And this program has been providing support to schools for 7 years. School staff can call anytime and talk immediately to a nurse practitioner or school nursing experience to help figure out what to do right now with the kid in front of them. Also provide professional development and so on. And what I'm talking about is how hard it is to navigate the budget process to try and get funding. We were developed under a grant, but when the grant ran out, we did initially get state funding, but the program that we were merged with to get the funding chose to terminate the program a year ago. So we thought it'd be fairly straightforward to somehow get through the gap year and then get the funding reestablished. And even though we have broad support in both houses, we did not get funded, while another amendment that was
Hey, Julie, if I may interrupt you,
just a program did.
Is there a specific question you'd like the governor to address, Julie, please?
If there's any assistance for organizations that don't have big lobbying organizations to help navigate the system, or whether the governor's office would be interested in talking to me about this program.
We got it. Thank you, Julie. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Julie. Well, you're touching on two topics that are near and dear to my heart. You're a school nurse. My mother still is a school nurse, and I appreciate the work of school nurses on so many fronts, and especially on mental health, which is another priority of mine. We need to continue to do more and more to meet the serious mental health needs of our population generally, especially when it comes to our young people. So, Julie, I'll have somebody from our Health and Human Services team follow up with you about specifics of that program.
Julie, do not hang up, please. We'll take your contact information and pass it along to the governor. Governor, the legislature is on a 1-month recess, which, to be fair, is 4 months less than next year's 5-month recess. Before they went on their 1-month recess, they did finally pass a budget. Included in the budget, and I think, do you have 1 day to decide, left to decide?
10 days.
No, but 1 day left. Don't you have 1 day more?
I think I've got a couple days.
Have you decided yet what you're vetoing? Or
we're working through that now.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the budget,
it's a short window.
I know it is.
Yeah.
So I believe in your original tax cut proposal, which I believe the goal of which was to make the state more competitive. We heard you say repeatedly.
And affordable.
And affordable. Excuse me, I left that one out. My apologies. $750 million. They have allotted $581 million. My understanding is in the budget that is on your desk, but with no details, even though they had months and months and months and months to effectuate what your desire was and what allegedly their desire was. Two things. One, are you troubled by the number? And two, are you troubled by the fact that it's going to be September before they even start reconsidering what relief, how they're going to make the state more affordable and competitive?
Well, I certainly want to see tax relief and the tax package accomplished. I am really pleased that we have a budget, and I'm about to sign a budget that we should be really proud of, both in terms of the shared priorities of my administration, the House, and the Senate. There are so many important investments that we are making as a state through this budget that will make our state more competitive, more affordable, more equitable. Huge accomplishments in this budget. And budgets take time. You know, behind numbers are people, behind numbers are policy. And so that has to get dealt with through through the conference process. But we're now at the point where I just have a few days left, and we'll be able to sign it. The budget is, I was really thrilled to see what came out of conference. Important investments. Mass Reconnect, which is a program that I propose making community college free for people 25 years or older so that we can bring them back into the workforce, train them up for jobs that are readily available today. Expanded grants for childcare and early education. Making universal school meals permanent. That's a huge thing for our young people. In-state tuition for undocumented residents. 1%, for the first time in history, 1% of your budget, the state's budget, will go towards climate. Early investments in early college, apprenticeship, and vocational training. So there is so much good there, important investments in people here in the state, and I look forward to that being finalized, and then we'll be on to the tax package.
So you're okay with the slow march to the tax package then?
You know, as I say, it's just the process of policy making, and no, I don't have concerns. I know we're all anxious and have expressed support for tax relief, and I would like to see that happen as soon as possible, and I will be advocating for that once again, as I continue to advocate for it now. We've got to get that done, but let's get the budget signed, and then we'll get on to the tax package.
We're talking to Governor Maura Healey. Joe from Bourne, you're on with the governor.
Hey,
Go
Joe.
ahead.
Hello, Governor. Thank you for taking my call. You mentioned briefly the Joint Base Cape Cod, and where I am now is very close to Joint Base Cape Cod, and their trains are still leaving daily with polluted dirt that was left over from the years when it was Camp Edwards and Otis Air Force Base. And now the Massachusetts National Guard is trying to designate a 6-lane machine gun testing range on this piece of property on the Cape, and it may very well add to the pollution of the watershed here. And I'm just wondering if you, as titular head of the National Guard, can simply order them to stop.
Well, Joe, I appreciate
Thank
the
you,
comment, and also the real concern in Bourne and the greater region. Obviously, this is something that is under careful consideration by our Department of Environmental Protection, and so we'll go from there. I certainly don't want to see increased pollution as somebody who's been incredibly committed to combating the needs of our environment, combating the climate crisis, not exacerbating pollution, and we're paying attention to that. I also, since it's in the region, not exactly, but close to, remember that just a few weeks ago I denied Holtec. They wanted to dump the wastewater from their nuclear power plant into the bay, and we said no to that.
Yeah, is that,
Joe,
is that resolved yet? What are they going to do with that water?
No, it's not resolved, but they're not going to dump it in the bay.
Okay, that's a step in the right direction.
Sounds like at least a part resolution in there.
We have Alejandro available at the Boston Public Library microphone. He wants to talk to the governor. Thank you for joining us. Alejandro, you're on with the governor.
Hey.
Governor Healey, thank you for taking my question. I'm a sophomore at UMass Lowell studying music education. Great. I got to hear you on campus a few months back as a keynote speaker, and I'm glad to hear from you again. We are constantly hearing alarming rhetoric on the right about their war on wokeness. But on this show, when you appeared a couple months ago and today, you've demonstrated that you are pushing for initiatives that will welcome people from all backgrounds and make them want to come to Massachusetts. You've also stressed the importance of having teachers of color in the classroom and a curriculum that supports all identities. And it is really great for you as our governor to understand that diversity is our strength. But as a future educator of color myself and as a product of Massachusetts public school system, I believe that we really need to fix our curriculum. While Massachusetts is known for valuing education, our curriculum is still framed through a white Eurocentric lens. You might have heard about the influence of Indian teachings on modern American ethics, or algebra from the Arab world, or the use of Afro-Latin rhythms and contemporary music. But the framing leaves the impact of these cultures diminished. American success is based on knowledge from all of these backgrounds, so it will be difficult to retain and attract BIPOC teachers in a workplace where the curriculum makes them into de facto second-class citizens. So a couple months ago, we were asked about supporting pending legislation and act to promote racially inclusive curriculum in schools, which would provide support a trust fund, and direction for DESE to develop and implement a racially and ethnically inclusive curriculum for K-12 public school education on all subjects. What can people of good conscience do to help you support this work and to get this bill passed?
Well, I really appreciate the question. And you're at UMass Lowell?
Correct.
Great. So what year are you?
So I will be a sophomore in the fall.
Oh, that's great. And where'd you go to school?
I went to school at Lowell, so I grew up in Lowell.
You grew up in Lowell?
Yes.
Yeah. You know, that was the first place I went. I think I'd been elected, but I hadn't been sworn in yet. It's still under construction. It's a great school.
Yes.
Lowell High School. Yeah. I met my first female high school wrestlers there, actually. Did you know that? You have female high school wrestlers there at Lowell. But it's a great school, and UMass Lowell, great university. And most importantly, I am thrilled that you are going into education. We need educators of color around this state. We know that outcomes are better for our students when we have that diversity. I think a couple things. You know, sadly, what the Supreme Court did several weeks ago in their ruling banning the consideration of race in admissions gave our state an opportunity, I think, to refocus. It's why I asked my Secretary of Education to convene with advocates and thought leaders and our colleges and universities to talk about what we need to do in the face of that so that we can still ensure the kind of diversity that will make us smarter and more robust and talented as a society. So it gave a chance to sort of center that work in a way, unfortunately, came about because of a bad decision, but it definitely raised the profile of that issue. I have been talking with our Secretary of Education and folks at DESE on ways we can support directly at the local level, the efforts that you speak of that are part of that important legislation. But I just, again, want to tell you how committed I am to it, and I just think it's really, really great that you're in school studying. Do you know what grade you want to teach?
I haven't thought it fully yet. I've been thinking about going to middle school.
Really?
Going to those grades levels, yes.
That's great. It's such a pivotal time in the trajectory of one's life. I say that with a couple of with a few middle schoolers in my family, and I know how important that is. So I love that you're doing that. Okay, we wish you success. Know that the administration is fully behind supporting students and educators like you.
Alejandro, thank you. Quick follow-up. Am I not right that in your budget, I think, didn't you include some language that would mandate the diversification of the teacher force? Am I right about that, or did
we supported the investments? Absolutely.
And it's not. Did it make it into the final budget?
I believe it did. Yeah.
Oh, it did.
And that's I think what Alejandro is speaking
okay.
of too.
I'm sorry.
To some of that,
aware. Okay.
how do we find ways to support? I mean, this is something that was flagged for me early at the start. It's something I certainly spent a lot of time talking to educators about the last couple of years. The need for cultural competency, the real statistics that show what happens when you do or don't have educators of color in a classroom. And I want for every young person's success in this state. I want everyone to have opportunity to be great, to learn, and to thrive. And we need to make sure that we are doing that through resources, including the kinds of workforce and personnel resources that are going to better yield that.
And this inclusive curriculum that Alejandro was talking about.
Oh, I think you've heard me talk about curriculum before on this show and take great issue with what some governors and some state legislatures around the country are doing in trying to rewrite history, write people out of history, to abolish the teaching of DEI, the discussion of race. That is dangerous, it is harmful, and it's absolutely, not anything that should ever be supported. It's just really dumb. And unfortunately, you see this happening. It's the same people who are looking to exploit the most vulnerable among us and use them as political footballs for some perceived political gain. But I think in the face of that, all I can do is work to make sure of who we are in Massachusetts and the kind of education we support, the kind of curricula we support. And we're proud. You may know this, Alejandro, but Massachusetts, we're home to the first public school in the country, first public library in the country, first public university in the country. And part of why I did that welcoming campaign a few weeks ago is because, I think at a time right now where you see other governors and other state legislatures taking us backwards as a country, certainly harming the residents in our state, in their state. It's really important that we in Massachusetts be clear that if you come to Massachusetts to go to school, we want you to come here to go to school. We want you to grow up here and stay here and not move. We want you as an employer to settle here and grow your business here. And if you do all those things, you will be in a state that makes sure that you have access to health care. We protect reproductive freedom. We care about our climate. We invest in education and workforce. We protect LGBTQ equality. We protect civil rights. We protect voting rights. Those are not just important values, they are actually economic imperatives for today's world and where we need to go, where we need to be. That's why Massachusetts is great. It's not to say we don't have issues. That's why I'm working on affordability and increasing housing so people can afford to live here. But this state, through the hard work of so many over time, there's a lot to be said for Massachusetts, and I'm proud of who we are. And I think I'm proud that we're going to be providing universal school meals to students, and not doing things that harm students, which is what you see happening, unfortunately, in some other states.
So Alejandro, don't even think of leaving Massachusetts.
No,
you got it?
that's right.
You got it? Okay, fine.
You know what I do? Everywhere I go, I was the other day, I don't know where I was, but everywhere I go when I meet people from somewhere else and maybe they're just passing through, I do this big sales pitch. And I don't know. I got somebody the other day, not too far from here. She said she'd think about it. She's thinking about it.
There you go.
She lives in New York, in the city, and she's like, I think this is great.
Yeah, maybe it's my daughter. She's moving back from New York to Massachusetts.
We're trying to get people to stay in Cambridge, Governor.
Yeah.
Do you want to join that campaign, or maybe not? Okay.
Governor Healey, one quick question before the break. Speaking of education, as you know, there are a bunch of Mass Teachers Unions, a bunch of parents, kids who are up at the State House on Wednesday, pushing for something called the Thrive Act, which would allow the controversial MCAS test to continue measuring students' achievement in English and math and other subjects, but they want to end it as a graduation requirement. I know you've said you want to make sure the test is equitable and measuring what needs to be measured, but do you think it should end as a graduation requirement as it is now in Massachusetts?
Well, since I took office and even before, we've been thinking about this and assessing this. And here's what I will say, as we continue to make decisions about this. It is important that we have assessment tools in our schools, and we've had that since at least 1993. So I think assessment, the ability to assess, is important, and I think every educator I speak with certainly supports that. The question becomes, what is it that you are assessing? Have we evolved in terms of our assessment and the kinds of things that we're looking at, or do we need to take more steps to evolve? And then there's also the question that you're raising about what are the consequences of scores? What's the import? And I think there are a lot of different ways to look at that, and probably any number of approaches. So we're taking all of that in right now, and we'll continue to have discussions with schools and with educators, with parents, with others on this.
You were endorsed by the Mass Teachers. Was there any pressure on you to endorse this ballot question from them?
No, I'm the proud daughter of 2 NEA members. National Education Association members. My mom's a health teacher and a school nurse, and my stepdad was a high school history teacher. And so, I'm proud of that endorsement. I'm proud of their support. And as governor, I'm going to do what I think is in the best interests of children and young people around the state.
Before we take a break here, Governor, and you'll be with us till shortly after 1 o'clock, 2 of the most impressive people I've ever met in my life died in the last couple of weeks. And I know you knew both of them. Charles Ogletree, who obviously most recently was at the Harvard Law School, and Greg Torres, who not only was a leader at the State House forever, but a leader in criminal justice reform throughout the state for decades and decades and decades. Do you have any quick reflection on either of these men?
It's really so sad that they are no longer with us, both young and just taken way too soon. And Professor Ogletree, I came to know years and years ago when I became head of the Civil Rights Division in the Attorney General's office. He was one of the people I reached out to early on for advice and guidance and mentorship. He was a mentor to so many people, and it is an incredible loss. And I'm sure that all who had the pleasure to learn from or work with him will continue to use what he shared with them. My own chief of staff, Kate Cook, actually tells a story. When she was at Harvard Law School, she had him as a professor, and he was the one who got her over to Roxbury District Court for criminal defense practice in a clinic. And Kate's somebody who has been primarily in public service ever since. So he touched so many people. And then Greg Torres, what he did in pioneering through publication, translating public policy and thought into actual communications that regular people like us could read and study and take in. He made so many contributions, and so very, very sad to see both of them gone.
Margie and I share in those sentiments. Thank you for that.
We're talking with Governor Maura Healey. She's going to be with us till shortly after the 1 o'clock hour. If you want to reach her, we'll try to get to as many phone calls and texts as we can at 877-301.
And the sun is out.
The sun is out. That's right. Thank goodness. I was worried about flooding right here on Boylston Street that would be swept away right in the middle of the show. 877-301-8970 is the number to call or text. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library with the governor for the next half hour. We're also streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy, Marjorie Egan. We're live at the library, streaming at facebook.com/GBH News, youtube.com/GBH News. Next week, the mayor is here Tuesday. That's right, for Ask the Mayor, obviously. Friday, Andrea Campbell is here for Ask the Attorney General. Right now, we're talking to Governor Maura Healey, who will be with us till right after 1 o'clock. You can reach her. Lines are full as always, but you can text her or come to the mic here at the studio at the library at 877-301-8970.
So, Governor Healey, we talked a lot about transparency because we're not a very transparent state here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and you pledged to make your administration more transparent. But Mike Dean was up at Boston Axios, talked about some of the records you've closed off at this juncture: correspondence with legislative leaders, email, phone logs, records about hiring process at the MBTA, sexual harassment complaints, and emails detailing how your administration acquired a stockpile of the abortion bill, mifepristone. How come those things are closed off?
Well, as you might imagine, I take issue.
Governor, could you move the mic just a little bit closer to your mouth?
Thanks, Margie. As you might imagine, I probably take issue with the characterization of our responses. Look, I said that at the outset that I was going to do everything that I could as governor to be as transparent with the public as possible, and that included not just doing what is under law, my right, which is to, right now the law doesn't apply to me in terms of public records. But I did comply, of course, as I had to as Attorney General, and I said that I was going to continue in that vein. To the extent we withheld documents, they are documents that are exempt under the public records law. Sometimes they're because of attorney-client privilege or because of there's certain safety implications presented. Sometimes they're within another exemption about deliberative process, but we have produced, including my calendar, a lot more information than other administrations. It may not be everything that everyone wants at all times, but know that we are making calls and judgments that are really in the best interest of the administration of the state.
I hope I pronounce this right. Sabine in Wayland? How do you pronounce your name?
It's Sabine.
Sabinas.
Yes.
Thank you. Welcome. You're on with the governor.
Thank you, Governor. You have promised to make climate protection a major priority of your administration, which is why I and many others voted for you. Thank you. As you know, the migration emergency that you just declared today is related to the climate emergency. And I just shoveled water for 2 hours out of my garage after spending thousands of dollars to decarbonize my home like many others. But are you aware that building out the Hanscom airfield for luxury private jets, as proposed by the developers, would potentially negate all progress Massachusetts has made on decarbonization? I mean, the private jet emissions at Hanscom alone would cancel 70% of the climate benefits from all the solar PV ever installed in Massachusetts. Are you aware of that?
Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much for your call. I am aware of that, and as you may be aware, this is now the subject of review by our Department of Environmental Protection, and we're certainly taking in comments from the public and having hearings on that, on what may happen, or what is to happen next, I should say, at Hanscom. And I'm so glad that you raised the comment up about climate. As I say, Sabina, this is something that's been absolutely top priority for me. It's why, as governor, I was the first governor in the country to create the position of a climate chief who is sitting atop and driving a climate agenda across every secretariat, across every agency, whether it's transportation, education, housing, health and services, you name it. Number two, I called for and got 1% of our budget, first time ever, to go towards climate. It's why we are working really hard to meet the moment. Our Chapter 90, which is a bill I signed last week that provides funding for infrastructure, for bridges and roads. That we're in a moment of necessary resiliency in building out whether it's housing or building out infrastructure that is sustainable, that is resilient to address what are the very real climate issues that are before us is so important. It's why 4 weeks ago now, the Lieutenant Governor and I were spending a lot of time in central and western Massachusetts with our farmers, New England farmers, absolutely devastated by catastrophic rain and flooding, the likes of which we really haven't seen before. And it's also why I just remind people we have a farm resiliency fund that we set up. We are asking people for donations. You can go to United Way, Central Mass, and make a donation to our farmers who lost everything, lost this year's crops, and due to the overflow of rivers and potential contaminants in those rivers that have now found their way to rest on beds in fields, their next year's crops are at risk. And so I certainly appreciate, Sabina, your comments. And when it comes to the geopolitical issues and some of the global migration that we are seeing, and it is global, how sad it is to get up and read about migrants, dying off the coast of Italy. Climate is driving so much of that migration. So we're all in this together. It's a top priority for me, and I appreciate your care for it.
Governor, you just mentioned a United Way fund in Central Mass for the farmers and other people involved in agriculture who suffered devastating losses. Earlier, you mentioned a fund also through the United Way out here for migrants and others who have shelter and other needs. Well, I think that's wonderful. Is that because what you hope will be funded by that private giving is inappropriate for the state to be doing, or why isn't the state doing what you're urging?
They are. So let me just, it's not an either or, it's a both and I'm grateful to the legislature. In the wake of that flooding, I asked for funding for these farmers. I asked for that along with the legislators of those districts, and both the House and the Senate came through, and I signed a week or two ago a supplemental budget, $20 million to help fund the farmers across Massachusetts right now who desperately need this help, for whom, by the way, federal help is not going to be available. The kind of farms that we have here are not the big ag farms that qualify for that kind of relief. And we'll continue to pursue disaster relief, but it's why I am grateful to the legislature for responding to the needs of our farmers. It's why, as an administration, we have been there on the ground and will continue to be. And now we have $20 million to distribute to farmers. Also, I thought it was important. I mean, the LG and I thought it was really important that we set up a farm resiliency fund, because this time it was farmers in western and central Massachusetts. Tomorrow it could be farmers in the South Coast or our cranberry growers, because the climate is affecting farms across New England. So that's that fund. And again, setting up announcing the fund that we're announcing today for migrant families and assistance there. That's not the only funding source. I mean, there is ongoing state funding being provided, unprecedented state funding, upwards of $45 million a month right now in state funding that is going, $45 million a month that is going, appropriated by the legislature to support our shelter system that is reaching, exceeding capacity. That's why I said it's a private call to the people of Massachusetts, and also an emergency declaration so that we can hopefully get federal funding to assist us in our efforts.
Governor Rama from Marlborough is texting and basically asking, we have the auditor, Diana DeZoglia, with us tomorrow, and she desires to audit some parts of legislative activity. The legislature has responded saying you have no constitutional authority to do it. Ultimately, the Attorney General has to, Andrea Campbell, has to decide whether she'll represent the auditor's office. You were the Attorney General not too long ago. Who's on solid footing, the legislature or the auditor?
Well, one thing I know is that Attorney General Campbell and her team will make a thoughtful and considered decision. She is the Attorney General, and I have every confidence in her decision making.
So you're not telling me.
I'm the governor now. That's it's appropriately before Attorney General Campbell. And as I say, I have every confidence that she and her team will take the time to work that issue through.
Well, you are the governor now, but I think when you were Attorney General, Governor Healey, we talked to you about the ongoing tragedy at Melanie Cass Boulevard, which has become open-air drug trafficking and a lot of human trafficking, violence. Apparently, according to the Globe, there's been 3 stabbings and 10 assaults there just in the last month, and Michelle Wu, the mayor of Boston, has called it a public safety alarm. I'm asking you about this because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, when Sheriff Tompkins said maybe we could open up the open space that we had used for migrants in this Suffolk County lockup and have people go there for 3 months of drug treatment, alcohol treatment, mental health treatment. Everybody said that was a terrible idea. That's awful. You can't force people. Yet in New York City, Eric Adams...
Excuse me. One person did not say it was a terrible idea.
Well, exactly. I was going to get to that.
Okay, sorry.
but you said, and I thought, I'm not an expert, but Eric Adams has forced people with severe mental health problems into treatment in New York City, and some of them who have been unable, because of the cost and other reasons, to get mental health treatment. Severely ill people like schizophrenics have gotten medication, and some have gotten better. So I'm wondering if, once again, we have this really tragic situation down there, if we were short-sighted. And you seem to be one of the people that thought maybe we could do something, because as you know, it's almost impossible to get 3 months of free mental health or drug or alcohol treatment.
I think what I was supportive of is this idea that there was space available, that there was a building available where people could go and receive access to services, health care, treatment for substance use disorder, stabilization, and the like. And, that I think right now what needs to happen is a coming together of the city and law enforcement and public health officials to talk about right now what is the actual snapshot of what is happening right now. It may look or be different than it was a year ago or 18 months ago, but what is it that's happening right now? And then what resources do you need to bring to bear to address that? As folks may
Including
know,
state resources, Governor?
well, there are state resources, and there are a lot of state resources that have already been expended that way. I remember as Attorney General, my office went after Purdue and the Sacklers and all those opioid manufacturers and distributors. The City of Boston has $4 million from that that can be applied towards this issue. The state continues to fund efforts to combat substance use disorder. It is not an issue unique to Boston, by the way. Of course, it is something that, all 351 of our cities and towns are impacted by this devastating crisis. It's also the case now we're seeing an exacerbation of real mental health issues, and I think that some of that was exacerbated by COVID. I'm always concerned about increases in violence and what that looks like. So I think it's important to get an assessment of what is currently fueling the situation right now on mass and CAS. And, I stand ready, as I always have, to be a partner. But I think, that's the direction of things.
We have another question related to opioids. Elizabeth is at the mic in the Boston Public Library. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Governor Healey, thank you for taking my question. So related to this conversation is the report that came out last month showing that opioid-related deaths are at an all-time high in Massachusetts. And so similar to some of the policies that at a state level can be implemented to address this, what do you think the call to action is for the private sector?
Well, I think that, thanks for your question, Elizabeth. It's really sad to me, as somebody who spent a lot of time on this issue, working to try to hold people accountable, working to go after funds from the perpetrators to now put back into communities to help families and residents. It's distressing, of course, to see that we continue to see overdoses and deaths in such numbers. I think, I appreciate you asking what the private sector can do, because a lot of times, and understandably, rightly so, it's what can the government do, right? But what can the private sector do? I think that anything you can do to put in place plans for employees that provide time to take care of a loved one, that provide, and I know health insurance is expensive, but making sure that mental health is covered in your plans in the way that your employers need it, and making sure that we have the kind of family and parental leave policies in place. I think these things help. I know private industry has been super supportive in stepping up and funding some of the philanthropic endeavors out there, funding treatment centers, funding programming that's going to help people get back on their feet. Funding mental health providers. I mean, we just don't have enough mental health providers or providers trained specifically in substance use disorder here in Massachusetts and around this country. So how do we incent and support more people going into those fields? What can we do to help them pay tuition, right? Or, to get through a training program? And I've long said that, if we could work together, industry, government, schools of public health, maybe there's a model where you don't need people trained up in a 4-year, 6-year program for some of this, right? It can be much shorter term. So what are the pathways to getting more people out there providing these services? Those are my thoughts, Elizabeth, but I really do appreciate the question. And I appreciate you, lifting up and shining a light on the fact this is still a killer out there. This is still something that is devastating so many families. And through my budget, you'll see, and the House and Senate as well, supporting investments in this issue.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Governor Healey, Marjorie asked you a couple of minutes ago about a ballot question submitted to the Attorney General's Office for Certification, or Secretary of State, and then the Attorney General, I guess, around MCAS as a graduation requirement. There's also one submitted that would implement local option rent control. And you told us a couple of times over the last year, and I think as a candidate as well, is obviously while you want to see the details of any legislation, whether it's on traditional route or I assume a ballot question, that conceptually you support local option rent control. Do you support this ballot question?
I haven't looked at it, but I continue to have the same answer, which is, anything that comes before me, lands on my desk, I'm going to have to review. But I've certainly, as a general matter, supported local control.
A texter wants to know, Governor Healey, what there is in the budget involving child care. She, like many people, talks about how her child care costs are higher than her rent costs, and she can't afford it.
Yeah. Well, there is a historic level of funding in the budget for childcare providers, for childcare centers. And there needs to be. And, you know, it's still not enough for what we're confronting in terms of the cost of childcare. It's why you see a lot of employers coming together and private sector coming together to find ways to provide childcare to their employers. But this budget represents a significant investment in childcare, and it's absolutely the right thing to do.
You know, Governor, I mentioned to you during the break here that I saw your speech at the NAACP convention. Michael Curry, one of the people most instrumental in bringing it, will be with us in about 20 minutes or thereabouts, 25 minutes, something like that. Obviously, head of the League of Community Health Centers as well as on the national board. Going into this, we were there to broadcast live on the Friday of the convention, and I think we asked every single person we interviewed 2 questions. One, do you think this will change Boston itself once the convention leaves here, or is it essentially a one-week thing? And secondly, do you think it'll change the perception of Boston around the country, where, as you and others know, when Black Americans were asked a few years ago, what's the least welcoming city in America, by a landslide, sadly, it was Boston. What do you think, one, what was your impression of the convention? And 2, what do you think the after effects of the convention will be?
Well, I thought the convention was a huge success, not just for Boston, but for the entire state. And huge credit to the NAACP Boston chapter president, Tanisha Sullivan, who worked alongside Michael Curry in bringing the convention here to Boston, Mayor Wu's team for helping to put on a fantastic show. I spent a lot of time over there, and the Lieutenant Governor did as well, and members of our team, our administration. And to a person, I was just asking the convention goers, and they were raving about Boston. And that included on a weekend when we had a lot of rain. They were still having a fantastic time here. And I think that the city of Boston and people of the state really, really did a fantastic job. And that will mean that people left here with a much higher impression of Boston and the state. And really, they, to a person, talked about how fantastic this convention was, as it should be. Because Boston, for folks who don't know, is the inaugural home of the first NCAA branch nationally. Boston is. Proud history. But we have not had a convention here for the NAACP, which is more what we call it now.
Right. That's right.
We have not had a convention here in 41 years. So it was great to be able to showcase Boston and Massachusetts. I spoke at the convention, however, and I said that for as important as the week was in bringing the convention here and the activities, particularly the activities showing off the talents and skills of young people,
yeah, that was great.
Fantastic. There was a lot there for that. The measure of who we are will be what we do in the weeks and months to come. Our commitment to addressing inequality, to addressing disparity, you know, that's got to be across every realm. I'm glad you're going to have Michael Curry in to talk about health disparities. As I said, when I go back this afternoon to the State House, I will be meeting with the group. Michael might even be in it, I think. I think he's leading that, to talk about health disparities and the work that we're doing together. So, you know, as with anything, it's a chance for it to be both a recognition and a celebration of the NAACP's incredible history, and also a commitment, a collective commitment on the part of all of us to strive every day to make real so much of what the NAACP and its members have fought for over time.
You know, the one impact that Margie, and I think I speak for you, came away with that can be long-term most dramatically is the state's record. You're new to the job. The state's record and the city's record of contracting with firms owned, run by people of color is abysmal. And essentially, the city, through Mayor Wu, and the NAACP local chapter, through Tanisha Sullivan, made a commitment to contract almost exclusively with Black-owned and other BIPOC firms, and succeeded. I mean, why did I don't know how to answer it.
Well, it requires.
What took so long for
So here, here's I think what the only path to it. It's not going to happen just because you put out some policy. It's only going to happen if you act with intentionality. If you have somebody driving that every day. I am so proud that the Chief Secretary for the Commonwealth, the person in charge of all appointments to agencies, commissions, boards, is April English. She pioneered my DEI efforts in the AG's office, increased the diversity of our staff and lawyers, and it's the same kind of focus she's bringing now to the administration. We have the most diverse cabinet in history. I also ordered an equity assessment across every single agency, not about who's working in the agency as much as who's getting the services, what are the outcomes, and unless you act with that intentionality, you're not going to get there. I also convened 2 councils, Latino Empowerment Council and a Black Empowerment Council. And they are out there. Tanisha is actually, along with Tony Richards, co-chairing my Black Empowerment Council, convening hearings around the state to report back to our administration in real concrete ways. Here are the disparities, here are the barriers, and working with us to address those. And certainly, it is about the dollar. It's always about the dollar. Where are you making investments? Where you make investments, where you spend money, says something about your priorities and your values. And we have an opportunity to do that as a state. I'm really privileged to be in this position. I'm still the civil rights chief on somewhere in my core, and you can imagine that equity is going to be something that bleeds through the work that we do day in and day out. And we do it in partnership. We do it in partnership, just like the collective call today to address the needs of migrant families. This isn't up to any one governor or administration. This is a collective effort, and it's certainly the case when it comes to equity.
Governor Healey, thank you very, very much for being here.
Great
we
to see you,
appreciate your
Governor
time.
Healey.
Great to see you all.
We
Have
hope
a good
you get
afternoon.
to take a little time off this summer. Everybody deserves their time off, even the governors. That's the voice of Governor Maura
Even the
Healey, who joins us
governors.
once a month for Ask the Governor. Well, yeah, it's hard to take a vacation when you're the governor, but I'm a big believer in vacations. Anyway, thank you very much, Governor Healey. She'll be back next month, and thank you for the calls and the texts. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Up next, we're going to be talking with Boston Globe columnist Marcela Garcia. We're talking to her about Afghans who helped the American military are still in danger in Afghanistan, and about the migrant crisis here that the governor talked about earlier. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting from the Boston Public Library, streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marge Regan live from the library, streaming at Facebook.com/GBH News, YouTube.com/GBH News. Next week, Ask the Mayor on Tuesday with Michelle Wu. Next Friday, Ask the AG with Andrea Campbell. Joined now at our studio at the library by Boston Globe columnist Marcela Garcia, also an editorial board member and the woman behind the Globe's bilingual Latinx newsletter, Mira. Marcela, it's great to see you. Hi.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much for being here. And Marcel, just a couple of days ago, you wrote a column that, I'm embarrassed to say I hadn't been thinking about what we did or didn't do for the people that helped the American military and the American government in Afghanistan. Update us on what's going on there with the Afghan Adjustment Act.
Yeah, talk about a group that we kind of have forgotten about a little bit, right? So this is, tens of thousands of Afghan nationals that we evacuated essentially when we exited the country, Afghanistan almost 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Sorry. Was that 2 years ago? 1 year ago?
I think it was
It was more than a year ago. I'm not sure.
No, it was in August, but it was last year. No, it was
2 years ago.
No, sorry, 2 years ago. I'm sorry. I just had a huge blank in my mind. No, it's 2 years ago because they were originally giving parole, which is basically a permit to be here of 2 years.
Right.
And so for all this time, Congress, there was a bill to adjust their status, which is so that they don't have to be applying, to this status. It was going to expire. We only gave them permission to be here for 2 years, and so there was always this effort in Congress to regularize their status and give them a chance to bring their families, to get a green card, etc. That bill went nowhere. And what I wrote is that if there's ever an immigration bill that has bipartisan support, is this one. And it didn't pass. Sorry, it didn't pass, and so now there's another effort to adjust their status. The Biden administration did give them the chance to apply for another 2-year renewal, but the truth is that we're keeping them in limbo. We're not.
And I guess I don't understand why anybody would be against this, because obviously, you hope there isn't going to be another Iraq or Afghanistan, but there could be. So, and when we go making these promises, no one is going to believe us.
Right.
Yeah. So what is
who's
the argument?
Opposed to this? Yeah. So there's a few Republicans in Congress, Chuck Grassley, opposed on the grounds that we really didn't know who these people are. Like, are they associated with terrorists? Do we really know who these, do we really want them to stay here permanently? And of course we know who they are. We vetted them. We obviously made sure that when they would be given parole, there was a vetting process, of course. And the other opposition most recently is that in the, what is it called, Defense Authorization Act that recently passed, there was an effort to include this there, but none other than Senator Tom Cotton blocked it because he has a bill of his own that would do this, but would do other terrible things about immigration. And so it's like, it didn't pass.
The issue that you just raised, and I know Seth Moulton raised it with you, he's raised it with us in the past. Obviously, he did 4 tours of duty. How can anybody trust this in the future? The threshold issue is not even that for me. It's so inhumane and cruel to these people, many of whose, the person you profiled, has a family, a wife and kids back in Afghanistan at great personal risk.
They're being harassed.
To them, exactly.
Right, because they know that they helped, or that his family member, who's now in America, helped American forces in any capacity. And so they're harassed. His house has been searched multiple times by the Taliban. So it's terrible that he cannot bring his family. He cannot put his family to safety. And he's here, and his family's there. So it's this permanent state of limbo that it's just so unfair. You're right, it's basic humanity.
So it's called the Afghan Adjustment Act. People, if they care about it, should talk to your member of Congress and see if we can meet our obligation to these people who served us.
It is the lowest hanging fruit as there is.
And by the way, while you just mentioned and answered Marjorie's question, a couple of sort of out there Republicans who oppose this, you also mentioned people like Lindsey Graham, who's not exactly a left-wing Republican.
Correct.
He's one of the sponsors of this thing, one of the biggest supporters of this. So the reality is, as bipartisan support, it should move.
It does.
Earlier today, you know that you were talking to her a minute ago, Maura Healey was here, and the first thing that Marjorie asked her about was her declaration of an emergency this morning that I don't think exclusively deals with migrant shelter, but migrant shelter is at the center of it. What do you think of her decision? Does it go far enough? Is it going to help address the problem? What do you think of what she did?
I think she has, to be fair, the Healey administration has done really all they can to handle this influx. You're totally right, and I think I want to spend a moment talking about this influx because our emergency shelter system, as she has noted, it's under strain. Part of it is migrant families, but it's also homeless families. Yeah. And so they don't have numbers because they don't ask for the immigration of status of anybody. We're a right to shelter state, right? That means that whoever needs emergency shelter has to have it by right. but they don't ask immigration status. And so in their estimation, they think that up to a half of the families that we have in the emergency shelter system are migrant families. And so the rest are homeless. And so we're focusing on the migrant, which we should, because that's a unique problem. It has seen an increase, but it's not just migrant families. It's also homeless families. As we all know, we are dealing with a housing crisis, period, right? As it relates to the migrant families, I think she has done everything she can. The emergency declaration gives it a little more way to access federal funds. But at the end of the day, in the editorial board, we wrote about this a week and a half ago. At the end of the day...
That was a great editorial, by the way. I forgot to mention that was a great editorial.
Thank you. That day, actually, it was when the congressional delegation from Massachusetts wrote a letter calling for the same thing for the Biden administration. At the end of the day, it's up to the Biden administration to give them work permits. You know, how are you going to let them get out of the emergency shelter system if you don't give them a chance to work?
Well, you know, I asked the governor the question about, I assumed naively that it was a function of the Congress. She says, no, it's the Biden administration. And I asked her, so why doesn't he do it by 2 o'clock today? She said it's a complex thing. And while I surely don't want to attribute motive to the governor, but it's hard to criticize the president of the same party, why doesn't he just do it by 2 o'clock today?
Obviously, I'm going to speculate, but I've been talking to a lot of people, advocates. And by the way, we're not the only state dealing with this. It's everywhere. California, New York City. I mean, I was just saying the New York mayor, Eric Adams, was essentially thrown out of the Biden re-election campaign because he was pressuring the administration publicly about this issue, give them work permits. And so, again, I can speculate, it's political. It's 100% political.
But business wants it too. They need workers. So
ultimately, this is, we're going into a presidential re-election year. I think it's wrong not to do it on every single front, political, humanitarian, economic reason. There's every single argument to do it. At the end of the day, I think there are people in his campaign, re-election campaign, that are telling him not to do this because of the political optics, the possible risk of doing this. He thinks he's going to be open to... Look, he's already open to criticism. They're already going to... Republicans are already hitting him on the border, like we have open borders, whatever. And to give the Biden administration credit, they have expanded legal pathways to immigration. I was reading, we quoted this statistic in the editorial. Since Biden took office, more than 500,000 immigrants have come into the country, right? But we're not giving them, all of them, the ability to work. And so you're on the one hand, they're doing something right, expanding legal immigration, because it's not like they're here illegally, right? Like all these families who have come in have a status, have a parole, and that's the avenue that you use to give them more permits. The Ukrainians, when the the war broke in Ukraine, that's how we opened our doors to Ukrainians, by giving them parole. But the difference is that we give them a work permit right away.
Yeah, and it can take months, or sometimes more than a year, or even 2 years to get a work permit. So obviously you have no way to make money.
How are you going to get out of a shelter?
And particularly in the caregiving jobs, there's so much, there's needs everywhere, but the caregiving jobs, I think there's huge needs. But you wrote a great column. I thought this was kind of a riot in a way. We have a mutual friend that was trying to negotiate mass health for a family member.
Oh, yes, indeed.
And it was just a nightmare. And this is a guy who had time and had the expertise and everything else. He couldn't figure it out. But your column about this Latina Instagram influencer, because these programs like SNAP funding or like help with rental assistance or shelters, all these things are so confusing.
So even to us. I went through my own personal nightmare with the RMV when I was trying to convert my Mexican license years ago. It became a point of personal pride and principle. Like, I have to do this. It took me forever. And it was like, I was determined to do it, and I did it. But going against a bureaucracy like the RMV is not an easy feat.
It is not easy, no.
But imagine when you have language barriers. Imagine when you're intimidated by government. Imagine when you are afraid because you're undocumented. And this woman single-handedly and very organically, by the way, started this Instagram account in which she fields questions from people. My SNAP benefits have been blocked. What do I do? Or the whole driver's license for undocumented immigrants right now is a huge thing in her page right now. Everyone is asking her about it. And she's offering very granular information. Like, for instance, I was looking at a post the other day. I didn't even know this. She was telling everyone that you have to show up with, to the road test, the part of the process. You have to show up with a car that has a handbrake or an emergency brake that is accessible by the passenger. Otherwise, you're going to be sent away, and then you're going to have to start the whole process again.
Who
this
knew
type
that?
of stuff.
Did you know
You
that?
got a car like that also.
Right. So, because, there are the cars that you have the brake, on the pedal.
Yeah.
But
older cars are down,
older
right?
cars,
Newer
and
cars are in the middle.
So that's the type of information
Yeah.
she's offering, like real life type of. Again, it's what I be. And so the other thing that she's doing also that I didn't mention in the column is she's fielding a lot of complaints of like racism or complaints about R&V employees that are not too perhaps informed of certain documents, which of course was expected. The R&B has hired tens of new employees to obviously handle the new demand that they knew they were going to get when they opened up the process of driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants. And so this woman, again, on Instagram, this Latina content creator, she's been doing this basically just out of her free time. She does it for free. She actually happens to work for the government,
I saw that.
which helps because
yeah.
she knows how to navigate the government agencies. So I just thought it was a remarkable thing that just sort of happens in a parallel universe, right? It's like we don't know anything about because it's immigrants.
I know she does this for free, though, but wouldn't this be a great job opportunity to, explain what the government is talking
It's
about?
a government function.
By the way, you find her, Elizabeth Amador, Amador on Instagram. You know what this reminds me of?
What?
Remember the two women we interviewed during COVID who, when the government couldn't figure out how to get people a shot.
Vaccine website.
These two women, both of them just had kids.
On maternity
The appointments,
leave.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
The
They're doing it out of their
newborn
house.
babies, the
But,
maternity moms, they
And
get
they
it
were
done.
like data whizzes, and
Yes.
they just
But,
created this. Yeah.
I don't know if this exists, but I'll tell you, since you're on the editorial board, why don't you write one of these things? Every agency should have navigators. There are people not just who answer the phone, but people who help. I mean, by the way, this is not just people who maybe are unfamiliar with the language or new to this country.
Right.
I mean, virtually everybody has a problem navigating some government bureaucracy.
Totally.
And if at the entry point you were able to get to a human being who stayed with you until your problem or issue was addressed.
Yeah.
We talked about this in the healthcare system
Or
a
in
lot
the
through the
public
years, and with Paul Revel
in public
the
public
education system.
BPS for the Boston Public Schools for the longest time has struggled with this. How do we serve families better? And it's this navigator type. I think Paul Revel, former education commissioner or secretary, he has put forward this idea of having this fleet of navigators, which is kind of counterintuitive because you're actually inflating the bureaucracy, but you're inflating it with a purpose, right? To tackle or to open up, I guess, avenues for people to come to you and to engage with the public education system.
Marcela Garcia, we only have a minute left because we're a little tight today because the governor was kind enough to join us for a little bit more than that hour there. The first month of licenses for undocumented people, even though there's a huge demand, the fact that the governor's appropriate extra money with the legislature, this is off to a decent start.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I was not expecting, or I wasn't sure what to expect when I started reporting this column where, a month after, this milestone,
July,
marking a month after the law went into effect. And everybody that I spoke to was, this has gone smooth. There are complaints here and there, but for the most part, the administration has been very, very responsive. I was told that there's a group of advocates that meet weekly with the Healey administration to go over things, what's happening, what do we need, where are some of the weak spots. There are long wait lists to get appointments, but that just is indicative of the demand. I'm just reminded of back when we were all arguing for this and people did not want, some Republicans in the legislature did not want to do this. They were like, how are we going to know who these people are? Or
the governor said that.
The governor said that. The
all
documents,
the time,
the whole documents thing.
The prior governor, I should say.
Governor
Baker,
former Governor Baker. And for the most part, this has proven that undocumented people want you to know who they are. They want to tell us who they are. They want to be less invisible.
When you said the last line of your column, it gives them a sense of belonging. It almost
it's true.
It's
true. I mean, it's a car that doesn't convey anything other than you are qualified to drive. right? And you're qualified to get insurance, and you're good. You know the rules of the road, but for them, it means a lot. It's the symbolism that carries.
It was a great piece, Marcella. It's great
Thank
to
you
see
so
you as
much.
always.
Thanks for having me very much for being with us
Thank
today.
you.
We've been speaking with Boston Globe columnist Marcella Garcia, who's also an editorial board member at the Boston Globe, and the woman behind the Globe's bilingual Latinx newsletter, Mira. Thank you very much for being with us, Marcella. Coming up, NAACP National Board Member Michael Curry on the impact of the convention that just happened here a few days back. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News and facebook.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy, Marjorie Eager, live at the library, streaming at facebook.com/GBH News, youtube.com/GBH News. Next week, it is Ask the Mayor on Tuesday, Ask the Attorney General on Friday, and this Friday, Philip Bang, the new general manager of the T, will be joining us here. We're joined now on Zoom by Michael Curry. He's president and CEO of the Massachusetts League of Community Health Centers. He's also a member of the National NAACP Board of Directors, where he chairs the board's Advocacy and Policy Committee. The convention just ended, and as the governor told us a few minutes ago, to quote her, she considered it a, quote, huge success. Michael Curry, it's nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. Good to see you both.
Yeah, so, and Governor Healey also credited not only Tanisha Sullivan, head of the NAACP here in Boston, but you, Michael, for putting together, working so hard on this convention. So it's only been a few days now, and I hate this word, but I can't think of another one. Your takeaway, what do you think? Just a few days out.
Well, one, there's a lot of work that goes into conventions generally, and it's a lot of stress leading up to the actual day that the convention opens. So I have to start by saying, one, a thank you and congratulations to Mayor Wu, who is a tremendous advocate and facilitator for making sure this was successful. A huge credit to Shagun Idawu, who was her chief, as well as Lori Nelson on her team, to the Meet Boston team, to the Mass Convention Center Authority team, and then the business community that really stepped up in the last few days and weeks, led by many, but particularly my good friend Bob Rivers at Eastern Bank. So many people showed up and eventually showed out to support this convention and to be successful. So the governor is absolutely right, including the legislature, by the way, who contributed greatly to the success of this convention. It was a huge overall success. When you think 10,000 people had registered Friday, the Friday before Saturday, which is usually our big registration day. And when you think that the NAACP National and the local NAACP have done well in terms of its fundraising that was needed, I think that's an overall success. And then last but not least, Boston got exposed to thousands of Black folks, mostly Black folks, who came to this city to shop, to eat, to experience our history and our culture. That's a huge win. And I think overall, I've heard mostly positive about their experience, and those people will come back and spend money in Massachusetts and in Boston.
We're talking to Michael Curry, who, by the way, I think is on Zoom because, as the governor told us, has a meeting with the governor in a few minutes. So talk about an incestuous kind of thing. I have to say, you're pretty subdued for a guy who is responsible with Marty Walsh for bringing this thing here to begin with, but maybe that's just the way you are. I wouldn't be subdued like that. But nevertheless, a lot of people are talking about a speech you gave as a leader of the organization, talking about the history of black activism in our city. Could you give us a truncated version of what you told the thousands of delegates about that history, Michael Curry?
Well, I'll tell you, my biggest disappointment in the convention is something that I proposed that didn't happen. I had proposed that we do a version of the Freedom Trail, which you'd have reenactors throughout the city, and bringing Frederick Douglass to life, and Du Bois to life, and Phyllis Wheatley to life, and Dr. King and Coretta to life throughout the week of the convention, so that they're almost like, Marjorie, if you were at Disney and you had 15, 30 minutes of Mickey Mouse.
Why is he talking to her?
Because I'm the other half of the show, Jim, that's why.
And we eventually didn't make that happen, but I think that would have been phenomenal. I think Boston doesn't know Boston's history. And as a city, we don't know that the architects of this movement, of our abolitionist movement in this country, Frederick Douglass had a home here. And I said, and as part of my remarks, I said he was in these streets. Du Bois was in these streets. William Monroe Trotter marched 10,000 people down Tremont Street in protest the birth of a nation when it opened here. Coretta and Dr. King here. The Prince Hall is named after Prince Hall, the founder of the Freemasons, the Prince Hall Masons. We have a lot of history here, civil rights activism, and those people cut their civil rights chops here or developed their civil rights chops here. We need to talk about that, celebrate that, and I think the reason why we need to is it gives us some perspective on where we are and some momentum for the work that we have yet to do.
You know, we were talking to our colleague Paul Singer, who worked with some BU students doing stuff on the Freedom Trail in the Old North Church, and the fact that there were many enslaved people that were buried there without names, et cetera. But he was talking about spending, I think he said, a couple of hours on the Freedom Trail with no mention of the enslaved people in Boston, kind of perpetuating this notion that, you know, we were all the abolitionists and we didn't have any slaves here, even though so many of the wealth right here in Boston came from enslaved people.
Including 16 of the 17 stops on the Freedom Trail, he said.
Exactly, that's right. So, I mean, we have not been that good about fixing that history at all.
Yeah, I mean, one is it's just a false perception and we didn't have a stake in slavery. You know, the Quaker Walker cases, which is what ended slavery about a century before nationally we ended slavery. We did have slavery here. That's why we talk about Faneuil Hall and the history of Faneuil Hall. So one is that's true. Then two, if you've ever read a book, and I'd encourage your your listeners to pick up the book, Slavery's Capitalism, which is a phenomenal book. It talks about how these northern cities, these northern states benefited greatly from the economy that was generated by slavery, cotton mills and so forth, clothing lines. So we benefited as well. I did want to mention, because I think it's important, the convention being here had many benefits. People got to see the sausage making that is policy of the national organization as they watched us debate policy issues. Just hours and days before we took those up on the floor of the convention with delegates, my committee, Advocacy and Policy, presented resolutions to the National Board that were voted on and approved by the National Board around banking black, supporting our black banks across this country. We passed and approved a resolution dealing with Senator Tommy Tuberville's blocking of U.S. Senate considerations and nominations for military officers, and that includes the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We passed a resolution addressing that issue. Equity and opportunity, race-conscious policies around affirmative action and our efforts to address that. There were a lot of good policy stuff that was done in Massachusetts that most people probably didn't pay attention to, but some real good work got done in those days we were here in Boston. Credit to the National NAACP Board of Directors.
You know, Michael Curry, we asked the governor this, and we asked virtually every guest, including you, who was kind enough to join us at the beginning of the convention a week ago Friday, about whether or not this convention, the week plus here of delegates, would change the city itself and would it change the city's perception, which is not terrific among black Americans when they go home. You sort of answered the last question, which was you think the vast majority of people had very good experiences and will relate them and they will come back. You said either a majority or for the most part. Were there experiences that people shared with you that trouble you?
There were, and I wasn't surprised. I did get a message just yesterday from some delegates from Florida who had a bad experience, both with customer service, with the hotel experience that they had. And you know what I identified at is, you know, the city's not perfect, and the reality is we got to address those issues when they arise. And I sent my respect, my sympathy, my apology to those folks from Florida. It was a minority of complaints that I've heard, but they exist. I don't think we should be shocked by that. Boston is Boston. And if I can experience that tomorrow, if I go out for lunch in Boston, then of course a guest is going to experience that as well. But I think overall the response was good. And I thought we treated people with a higher level of respect, which is what I was hoping for. And I hope we maintain that going forward, which is, I hope, the benefit of this convention. Treat people well, and they come back and spend their money with you, with us. And it will ultimately change the perception of Boston as a racist city. We are a racist city, as I said, as every other major city and every other town. But that is a work in progress.
How about the other half of the thing? How has Boston changed, if it is at all, by having this convention here for a week after 40 years? The thing that Marjorie and I said to each other and mentioned to the governor, we had a couple of contractors on one woman whom I know you know, had contracts all over the world, including back home with the inaugural committees of United States presidents, but never had a contract in Boston till she got 2 events contracts here for more than $1 million. And a guy who ran a
Privé parking,
yeah, who ran
a hot ticket,
who had no ability. He was reached out to by Shagun, as you mentioned, from the city about doing the transportation for the delegates. He had no capacity to do that, but he figured out a partner, I think from Connecticut, to make it happen. And it seems that the goal of having almost exclusively Black-owned and Black-run businesses getting the contracts here happened. So I hope that will carry over. We're going to have them both back in a month or two. Beyond hopefully changing the contracting paradigm, what else do you think, if anything, is affected by the longer term, by the presence of the delegates here for a week?
Well, one is I think that it empowered many folks who've been in some key positions, whether they're corporate DEI folks, whether they're city officials, state officials. You know, shout out to April English and the work I know the governor mentioned. April's doing the Diversify State Government. We've been waiting for that for a long time. There's been way too little diversity within state governments, within the secretariats, within boards and commissions. So shout out to April English and the work that she's doing. I think that it empowers many of us in key roles to now push that work forward. I think the work that Shagun's been doing to bring more diversity to contracting for the city, to push more contracting with the state, is the work that we need to, one, be optimistic about, but then to measure. Trust and feel optimistic, but also verify that there's progress and there's significant investment going into Black and brown businesses of color. I'm hopeful, Jim and Marjorie, that this convention will give us the momentum to do that. But I do know that accountability matters, transparency matters. We got to track it. We got to ask for dashboards to look at where the money's going and to whom. And then we have to hold people accountable. I think, there's nothing more powerful than a conscious, empowered person to move the needle. And I think many of us in Boston now feel empowered out of this convention.
One last quick thing before you go. The governor said the meeting this afternoon that you will be a leader in is about the thing we talk to you almost every time you're on the show, this health equity initiative that you and dozens of other leaders of color in the healthcare world have been championing. How are things? I mean, a budget just came out. I have no idea if the budget addressed some of your concerns. Budget's on the governor's desk for her signing or whatever she chooses to do. What's the state of affairs on this initiative of yours?
Well, most importantly, and I know at some point I'll be back on your show and I'll talk in detail about the hearing that's coming up in September. We need to pack the House. That if we really realize that Black and brown people are living 10, 15, 20 years less, that we're dying of almost every disease, then that hearing should be packed with folks, not just Black and brown folks, but our allies, supporters, businesses, health plans, hospitals should come in droves to say that we're tired of this and we no longer want to accept health disparities that are taking lives. So that's one.
When is that, by the way? When is that, Michael?
The date slips my mind right now,
okay,
but in September I can follow up.
We'll get to it next time we talk to you. Go ahead.
And then the governor's meeting is really to say that we're working closely with Secretary Kate Walsh of Health and Human Services. We're working closely with the Medicaid director the Director of Mass Health, the Undersecretary, Kiame Mihania, and the rest of the team. We just want to be on the same page with the governor that this should be a priority of her administration. We led in health reform in Chapter 58 in 2006. We've led on every iteration of health reform since then. We need to lead in health equity. And I think we need the governor to be the most vocal, the person with the most urgency to say, no, we now want to lead from the front when it comes to health equity. And we don't want to be the best of the worst, as you've heard me say before. Our maternal health numbers are not as bad as other places. Life expectancy isn't as bad. Our poverty rate, environmental issues aren't as bad, but they're bad. And in Massachusetts, we can do something about that in partnership with the governor. I'm excited about the meeting with her in 20 minutes and excited that we can do that work together.
By the way, Jamie, our colleague, looked up. The hearing is September 20th, 10 a.m. in Gardner Auditorium.
Thank you, Jamie.
At the State House. So we will urge people to be there. We'll see you next week. But let me just say, I spent a lot of time at the convention.
Yeah.
Thanks to you. Congratulations. It was an affair to remember. It was great. And I know you deserve a lot of the credit for the wonderful outcomes. Thanks for your doing what you do, Michael Curry.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate you. And I'm glad you were there. So thank you for coming through.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Michael, as always, for taking the time. We've been speaking with Michael Curry, President and CEO of the Massachusetts League of Community Health Centers and a member of the National NAACP Board of Directors, where he shares the board's advocacy and policy committees. We've been saying all day, one of the key people for getting the convention here in Boston after 40 years. Okay, coming up, we're going to open the lines to talk to you about van life. As in traveling around the country in vans, modest vans, snazzier vans, or perhaps, like Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, a $250,000 van
that he didn't pay for.
He didn't pay for.
As far as we know.
That's right. Or maybe, because housing is so expensive, you decided to go the van route. I have a lot of friends that are in vans, Jim. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library. The number to call if you're a van life fan or not, 877-301-8970.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan. We're live at the library. We don't have much time, but this is a really important topic. The average cost of a single-family home in Boston, as you know, is about $1 million. Rents are ridiculous, too. By some measures, the highest or close to the highest in the country. So we're going to end the show by asking if you're taking a page out of Clarence Thomas's playbook and opting for an Airstream instead. The Supreme Court Justice, who I read this weekend, is making headlines for his purchase. Well, I shouldn't say his, but the purchase of a $250,000 RV decades ago. New reporting reveals he didn't pay for it himself, but claimed it reflected his, quote, man of the people, up by the bootstraps ideology. So we're opening the lines now, sadly, not about Clarence Thomas's behavior, but about the appeal of van life. Once a niche lifestyle choice to live on the road, the rise in remote work during the pandemic and housing prices mainstreamed the idea of living out of a camper van. Are you a van life adopter, or are you firmly entrenched in your settled sedentary way of life? 877-301-8970. Is this something you could get into?
No.
Good.
But I do know people that are really into it. I have
like
a cousin.
Who?
Well, my cousin, they live out in California. They've had a van forever, and they just drive it around the country.
Do they have a house?
I don't know if they do now. They used to have a house that they would rent out, but they don't have I don't think they have a house now, and they just go around in this van. One of my best friends from home, she's in an Airstream going around the country.
No.
Yes, she is. And the other day I drove down to my sister's house. I drove into the driveway, and there was this big van. I said, what's going on?
In your house?
Well, not in my house.
No, I meant
in the
the driveway
at my sister's house. And there was another good friend of mine whose husband has a van, and they take it around to campgrounds all summer long. And my friend from home, she goes to the national parks. They have to make the reservation.
So why don't you want to do this?
Because
by the way, your sister's house is your house too. You
that's
aware
right.
of that?
It's our house.
Just want to be
it's
clear.
our house.
Okay, fine.
And it's a whole different way of
Oh,
life.
really?
But if you've been inside one of these
no,
things,
I have.
I've not been inside
There
the
are two issues.
$250,000 one, but I've been into a regular Airstream, and those are supposed to state of the art, the Airstreams. It's very claustrophobic, and you really can't take a shower without thinking about it. Use the John without thinking about it. You got to empty the toilet.
Well, that's the issue
A
for me.
manual toilet thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little too claustrophobic for me.
So,
Jim.
by the way, his $250,000 Airstream was like 2 decades ago. So it's even more
That's right.
expensive
Be
than that.
$500,000 one.
Here's
and what
my
do you
take.
get for $500,000 one of those
A big
things?
Airstream is what
I guess
you
you
get.
get very luxurious ones.
I guess so.
All leather, I understand.
Okay, fine.
Travis
so let me
Thomas
say 2
likes
things.
that.
One, I think if I can't stand up in something, I'm not living in it.
Well, you'd be
That's
too tall.
one.
You'd be
And
too tall.
2, let me tell you something. You touched on the most
Yep.
important thing. Any living facility where I have to dump the toilet out every once in a
Exactly.
while is a place I will not
Yep.
be living. And by the way, you need to do that unless you have a really high-end kind of thing, right?
Well, that's absolutely right.
Wait a second. If you have a high-end, where does the you-know-what go?
You probably have a valet who comes with you and takes care of it, don't you think? Okay, here's
That's my kind of Airstream.
To give us a mood here, here's a popular TikTok from a user, Sunny Luna Living, that runs through 4 of the biggest deterrents to life in a van.
Okay, good.
4 things we wish we knew before starting van life. Number 1, how incredibly hard it is on our bodies. Since starting this lifestyle, our bodies have become so tight and sore, it's crucial to stretch daily. Number 2,
Shut
how
up.
often we would be completely without cell service and Wi-Fi, which
Huge.
makes it impossible to work.
Okay, 3.
Number 3, how much food and gas adds up to. By far, this is our biggest expense
That is a
takes
big
the
deal. Get an
deepest
electric
toll
one.
on our wallet.
4.
And number 4, how often we'd be pooping outside.
Well, let me tell you something. That counts me out right there. Thanks for bringing that up. 877-301-8910. Let me just explain. The only thing that appeals less to me than van life is cruise life.
Cruise life.
And so we'd love to hear from people. I only have a few minutes left. What do you see in it that not only I, but Marjorie apparently is missing?
Yeah.
Kathleen in Falmouth, what's up?
Hi, van life after high school. Told by my guidance counselor to find a rich man and marry him.
Yeah.
I bought an old electric company van, fixed it up to sleep in, and drove across country up to Canada and down to
Wow.
Mexico. But I was young.
How was that?
It was great. But sleeping in hotel parking lots, then nobody could find you. Eating on the road. It was fun, but I was 19, 20 years old.
So can we get to the critical issue, Kathleen, and be as ungraphic as possible? How do you deal with the bathroom issue when you were traveling at 19? What'd you do there?
I stopped at a gas station.
Yeah, I love going to the bathroom at a gas station. They're
lovely.
always so clean. And Kathleen,
Well,
thank you for the
apparently
call.
we have an answer from our staff here.
What is it?
Well, apparently if you want to know where to dump your van dumps, you go to rvdumps.com. And that tells you where you can go. It gives you
That's
all the
really-
information.
That's a
Yeah.
business I was always hoping I could start, but I guess they beat me to
Yeah,
it.
the person, somebody wrote a piece for Business Insider about living in a van full time, and she
they
did
say?
agree, or he did agree that was the problem. The bathroom situation can be difficult using the toilet. You have to plan in advance for all those kinds of things. And then the other things, expenses, insurance, and things like that.
By the way, excuse me, I just went to rvdumps.com.
Yeah.
You can get a dump station directory for free from the website, which is fabulous. I mean, it really is very welcoming, I
Yeah.
should say.
And somebody else is spending her life in a van. She says it's great because she only sees her husband once every 4 to 6 weeks, and it's been wonderful for the marriage. Gary in Brockton, thank you for calling.
Hello, Gary.
Hi, good afternoon.
You too.
You just described my ultimate fantasy. Get in a vehicle and drive away with my dogs, a guitar, and maybe some way to play the music I love. But I just would love to meet cousins I've never met, where they live all around the country, and see some parks I've never seen. But you need money and stuff for that, and I don't really have much right now.
Yeah, well, that's an inhibitor.
It was such a great experience.
Yeah.
I mean,
to see this great country of ours. I hate flying. I couldn't go on a plane if you paid me. Just give me a nice RV, and I would love that.
Wow. Well, that's quite an endorsement, Gary. Good luck. I hope it happens for you.
Carrie in Southborough says, my family and I traveled in an RV across the United States to move to New England a few years back.
Oh.
We were like caged animals for a month, but I loved it. The rest of the family, not so much. If I had my choice, though, I'd still be out on the road with or without them today. Sort of kidding, not really. Carrie in Southborough.
Now, Jamie just sent us a photograph of what he calls the official Jim Browdy van life. Could you describe what it is?
That's the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile.
That I could live in.
Well, they have a little yellow car on the bottom. They have the Wiener on the mobile on the top.
Didn't that woman tell us that they have sex in there all the time?
Well, what happens is the Wienermobile, they're hired by Oscar Mayer, apparently.
I know they are.
They don't call it the Wienermobile anymore because people are making fun of that name too much.
Well, for good
But
reason.
they hired two young people right out of college.
To have sex with each other in the Wienermobile.
And before long, the two young people become couples and they have sex in the Wienermobile.
That's why they call it the Wienermobile.
Yes, it was
Marjorie.
Jamie Loftus. She wrote
brilliant.
Raw Dog, a very funny book about hot dogs, and she's got a great podcast. The one about Lolita was really absolutely terrific.
877-301-8970.
Okay, I'm a therapist. I have several clients who are seriously considering van life. For them, it is a rejection of society and people in general. They want to live off the grid and have complete autonomy.
What's that fabulous movie we were talking about before the show?
Nomadland. With Frances McDormand.
Not Nomadland.
Nomad. That's what I said. Nomadland.
How painful and beautiful was that?
Well, they had this whole kind of colony of people that would come back every year to and this guy, he was this guy, his name was Bob Wells, and he was this mentor to this legion of these van dwellers, and they have this annual conclave or festival or self-help seminars out in Arizona, and people come there in their vans and he's kind of like a preacher almost of the van life. It was pretty sad. People that were living in these vans often were people that were broke, right?
But a lot of them seem to be happy in that community. Maybe I shouldn't characterize it that way. By the way, if you go, I'm obsessed now, with rvdumps.com, I'm sorry, I mean, it is what it is. I didn't make up the name. Not only can you find out locations to dump? I mean, okay. You can make contributions. You're encouraged, I'm reading from the website, to contribute to the site. If you know of a dumping location not included here, feel free to submit the location by completing the following form. So you can actually participate in the work of rvdumps.com.
Okay. Well, other people are saying we honeymooned at a van rental, best trip ever. Although this is from Paul and Worcester.
What do you say?
Van life bummer that will likely cement Jim's not wanting to live like that. Very good friend of mine, says Paul, and his wife. Yeah. They did that about 10 years ago, and they really loved it. Until the husband had a heart attack and died in the middle of nowhere.
Well, that is a problem. But he died really happy, from what I understand.
I guess. Let's hope he went quickly. But it could be a problem.
Do you know, if we got a van for the show, the BPR van, we could go throughout New England and do the show at remote locations.
Right.
What do you think of that?
I think that would be a disaster,
I think it'd be a disaster.
But that's okay. Let's go to Christina Warwick. Thank you, Christine.
Hey, Christine, what's your deal?
Hi, what's my deal?
Yeah.
I guess with respect to van life, there's a romanticized version of van life
Right. You're
that's
right.
really only available to extremely financially privileged people.
I think you're right.
And then there are people who are forced into van life because housing is completely unattainable.
Well, that's
like Nomadland, the movie, yeah.
Right.
Have you ever done it?
You can go to $500,000, and it can be an extremely way to live. And vans with modest living might have a bed and a cook stove.
Have you ever done this?
I have had a camper, but I did not live in it.
Huh.
But I can't imagine really living in like a conversion van. It's
Nor can I.
incredibly difficult. Medical treatment for people that are traveling and living that way is really difficult. When you talk about these big RVs with fireplaces and expansion pullouts and all that, it's a whole different thing. It's almost a hobby.
Yeah, well, it's a hobby I choose not to engage in. Thank you, Christine, for an excellent call. By the way, I'm sorry to keep doing this. It's not like I'm on the payroll.
Yep.
But another a wonderful attribute of rvdumps.com They have a free newsletter. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
Are you on the mailing list?
I am not on the mailing list.
Why are we not on the mailing list?
RVDumps.com.
I'm going to be.
Okay,
I'm
we'll
putting
put
you
us
on
both
it, too.
Thank you very much.
That is fabulous.
So I can get the ins and the outs, little tricks of the trade.
Exactly.
Or dumping
it's
in
free.
the RV
It's
kind
a
of
free
thing.
newsletter.
Okay. So
what?
this woman that did this thing in Business Insider, two of them, the husband and wife couple, they talked about how you're away from your family a lot. What are you laughing at?
Jamie has now done an AI-generated image of Jim, a live shot of Jim, emptying the BPR vans. You know what?
That was from the Christmas Vacation with
Yeah,
Chevy
it is.
Chase movie. That's a
Exactly,
riot
it
when his brother or brother-in-law shows up with the van outside the yard. That is a problem, parking the van.
Why is your right eye closed?
Because I was putting an eye drop in it.
Sorry.
Allergies or whatever
Shouldn't
it
have
is.
brought it up,
My cousins had a little problem when they parked this massive
What
van.
happened?
Well, the neighbors get upset about it. They
Yeah,
don't like to have
probably.
massive vans parked on their street.
No.
They get very upset about it, even though they do not look like the guy in Christmas Vacation
Whatever
movie.
it is.
877-301-8970. Brady in the car. Thank you for calling.
Hey guys, long-time caller. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you. Bad connection, but let's try it.
Okay, I lived in a van for 14 years as a touring musician and stand-up comic.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been 4 to 6 months a year, not all year.
How was that?
It was rough. It was not easy. I wasn't well enough off that it was cushy. But I saved a lot of money on hotels. I slept in my camper in Montana when it was 20 below.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Brady, when you were, for those 14 years, did you subscribe to the free RV Dumps newsletter or not?
I did not. I did not.
It could have been a lot better had you. Brady, we're out of time. We really appreciate your call, and I'm glad you're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
I hope you don't miss the
Brian,
touring.
we mentioned the Wienermobile before, that the young employees would have sex in all summer long.
Not all of them, but most of them.
Not all of them, that's right. But Brian from Paxton says the new name of the Wienermobile is the Tube Steak Touring Coupe.
No, you shouldn't have said that on the air.
I shouldn't have said that?
Tube steak is no, you should not.
Oh, whoops.
Okay.
I didn't. Was it some other meeting I didn't know about there? Whoops.
I think there is.
Sorry about that.
Well, luckily the show's
over.
over.
I have my job done
Marjorie
tomorrow.
didn't mean that for
I
whoever's
didn't mean
listening.
that. I didn't. No, I didn't mean that at all.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
I think
you
it's
can tell
time
me
to
after
leave
the
now.
show what it does mean.
Well, I think you just figured it out.
I
didn't
didn't.
you?
I didn't. I'll have to ask Miss Crispo, the living
It's
fossil.
rvdumps.com.
Thank you for listening to another edition of Boston Public Radio. Keep up with us 24/7 by way of our podcast. We have a new abbreviated podcast.
We do?
Half Hour. Zoe Matthews, our colleague, has put it together, and she's done a great job.
Fine
You
job.
want to get an abbreviated version
Yeah.
of us, and who wouldn't?
Who
Tuning
wouldn't?
tomorrow from Massachusetts State Auditor Diana Gisaglio, the one who's trying to audit the legislature. Good luck to her. We hope she's doing well. Harvard National Security expert Juliet Kayyem, Wall Street Journal senior personnel technology
great,
columnist
great.
Joanna Stern. We had her on before,
Yeah, we did.
and
She's
she
good.
is great. PBS European travel guru Rick Steves, who's back from his most recent travels, and local woman, or our media maven and coyote fighter, NBC 10's Sue O'Connell. I want to thank our crew, Zoe Matthews, Aidan Conley, Nicole Garcia, Hannah Loss. Additional support today from Shay Sullivan. Our engineer is John DeClaw Parker. Our executive producer is Jenny Bologna. Special thanks to the BPL team here at the library, Evelyn Brito, Angelica Marrero, and Steve Baracci. I am Marjorie Egan.
Well, before we go, we're getting buried in information requests. Again, rvdumps.com, and you click on free newsletter. I can't guarantee you what you're going to get, but I can guarantee it's free, and you'll get it, whatever it is.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
I'm not saying another
You're
word.
not? Okay,
No.
well, I'm Jim Browder. Oh, you said you're Marjorie Egan.
I am.
Then I'm supposed to say I'm Jim Browder.
You are.
I am.
Thank you very much
See
for
you
tuning in
tomorrow.
today.
Bye.
Hope you can tune in tomorrow. And meanwhile, the sun is out. Hope you have a great afternoon.